Our guy strolled through a ruined building, leaving a trailing beam of magical energy in his wake. Out of nowhere, a massive beast blocked his path, looking like a cross between a gorilla and a bear, complete with giant horns and surprisingly human ears. The monster opened its jaws and let out a vicious growl, its eyes glowing a menacing red as saliva flew in every direction. Meanwhile, a swarm of blue portals popped up in the sky outside, all linked together by a single pulsing beam. Our hero simply declared that he was the one calling the shots here. Right after that, he dropped to a crouch, pressed his hand to the floor, and a glowing magical pentagram started forming right under him. He began chanting a spell designed to blanket the earth in ice, summoning a massive snowflake in his palm that looked ready to freeze everything in sight. Plunging his surroundings into an eternal slumber, he unleashed the permafrost spell, and a towering snow woman materialized right behind him. Feeling this massive surge of power, the monster started growling and clawing desperately at the floor. The snow woman blew a chilling breath toward the beast, and it immediately began freezing over with a thick crust of ice. Not long after, the sun's rays peeked into the building, causing everything to gradually thaw out. The House of the Magician stood as the most skilled magical family in Korea, and even among those geniuses, our boy was considered a standout talent. That was the case right up until his dad called him into his office. The boy was the third son of this prestigious magical house, going by the name of Shin Hyul. He confidently stated that he would achieve results worthy of their esteemed family name and was absolutely going to graduate at the very top of his class at the Obelisk Magic Academy. He claimed he would become the world's greatest Archmage and lead their house to new heights, while his father noted that his talent outshone his brothers and left everyone else in the dust. They had sky-high hopes for him, expecting him to reach the absolute peak of interactive magic and dominate the magical arts. Shin Hyul just offered a confident smile and gripped his amulet. He promised to execute his duties flawlessly to become the top mage worldwide, vowing to surpass not just his siblings, but his father too, who is currently the nation's greatest mage. Fast forward 2 years, and this dude was hitting the books at the Obelisk Academy of Magic, a seriously prestigious school. The instructor announced that the second-year students needed to gear up for an internship test happening that very day. He mentioned that a student named Baek Sa-hyuk just had to do his usual thing and had zero reasons to stress, prompting our boy to wonder who exactly was stressing out here. After all, the dead last spot was already claimed, and every single eye in the room pivoted right to Shin Hyul. The whispers noted that he didn't even grasp the basics of magic, making everyone wonder how he was even passing his classes. They labeled him a useless idiot, completely incapable of casting interactive magic. Shin Hyul internally noted that modern magicians were actually pretty rare and highly valued assets. Just then, the teacher gave Baek Sa-hyuk the green light to start his practical test, and a pack of wolves instantly spawned around him. The kid conjured a magical panel in front of him that shot out a fireball, and the teacher praised him for easily beating the time limit to wipe out the monster. Modern magic had gotten a massive upgrade thanks to artificial intelligence, with all current mages rocking implanted chips that made casting complex spells a total breeze. But our hero just couldn't get the hang of it, and the teacher announced it was finally his turn to step up and fight. First, he focused his mana right into his heart, the very core of his magical juice. Next, he started building a magic circle, carefully working his way through an 8-step sequence. Before he could even finish, the wolves lunged and attacked him. Baek smugly asked if our guy actually thought that pathetic display was magic. The crowd called him a walking fossil, an outdated spellcaster who couldn't handle interactive magic, and straight-up trash who needed to quit and learn his place. This thoroughly ticked off Shin Hyul, who was now sitting flat on the floor with no monsters left to fight, having entirely timed out of the exam. The proctors announced his failure, and the entire room erupted in laughter. Sweating profusely, the guy gripped his hands tight, struggling to process yet another brutal failure. He tried to look on the bright side, noting that at least his conversion speed had bumped up a tiny bit. On the day he was officially labeled a total loser, his dad completely gave up on him. His old man even mailed him a pill designed to permanently destroy the magic circle in his heart. But our boy stubbornly clung to his dream and stuck with the old-school way of casting spells. It was a method nobody used anymore, but he chose to keep learning it, even though the massive catch was having to rely entirely on dusty old books. Chilling in his room, Shin Hyul couldn't fathom why these ancient texts hadn't been digitized yet. Out of nowhere, a weird book caught his eye, one he had absolutely zero memory of buying. He cracked it open, flipped through a few pages, and realized it was looking pretty beat up. It gave off serious antique vibes, but the handwriting was so incredibly complicated he couldn't read a single word. Then the name Rachel Whitener jumped out at him, a name he hadn't thought about in ages. Rybel Whitener was famously humanity's very first greatest magician, the founding emperor of the magical empire, and basically the inventor of magic itself. Back when Shin was a kid, he used to see that name plastered all over memorials. Suddenly, the book's pages started flipping completely on their own, blasting a blinding light into the room. Shin threw his hands over his eyes, dropped the ancient tome, and panicked over what was happening. Peeking through his fingers, he finally recognized the nature of the glowing light. Out of the blue, the book actually started speaking, claiming that anyone who shared its nature would be able to hear its voice. The voice introduced itself as Rachel Whitener, and formally bequeathed the book to our boy. Shin Hyul was absolutely floored that a piece of reading material was talking to him. Little did he know right then that being the school's biggest failure was actually about to become his greatest weapon. The instructor announced that anyone who bombed the practical test would be forced into extra remedial classes. The students immediately started gossiping about who choked, with someone loudly pointing out the obvious. It was the same dude who couldn't get his AI chip to work. Shin Hyul, practically drowning in his own helplessness, suddenly felt like he had been given a second lease on life. The following day, he showed up at the bustling academy cafeteria for a bite to eat. Our guy claimed a spot by the window and quietly started chowing down on his breakfast. Another student wandered over and asked why he was flying solo for a meal yet again. Shin was genuinely surprised to see this particular guy hanging around. Without even waiting for an invite, the dude plopped down right next to him and casually mentioned that Shin's food looked pretty tasty. This was Ji Suchan, now happily shoving rice into his face right beside our hero. Despite looking like a total mess, Ji was actually a heavyweight sorcerer, ranked in the Academy's top 10, and already rocking the third circle at just 18. Ji tried to snag some of the guy's food, assuming he wouldn't mind, but Shin firmly told him to stick to his own plate. Honestly, this food thief was the only person Shin could actually call a friend in this miserable school environment. Ji offered to act as muscle, telling Shin to just point a finger if anyone was giving him a hard time. Shin brushed it off, saying everything was fine, and casually mentioned finding a really weird book the day before. He explained that this bizarre book went completely blank after page 3, and he suspected it belonged to Rabel, unless it was just some elaborate prank by the other students. He described how opening it unleashed a crazy light and a friendly voice, which impressed Ji, who noted that casting a spell like that on a book was seriously high-level stuff. Shin relayed that the voice claimed the book was an inheritance meant specifically for someone like him, and that anyone else wouldn't even be able to pry it open. Intrigued, Ji asked if he could give it a shot, but Shin warned him that the last page literally contained a death threat for anyone attempting it. Our boy explained that the book instructed him to ditch the heart and build a magic circle directly in his brain instead. Ji immediately lost his sense of humor, pointing out that putting a magic circle in your brain was basically a guaranteed death sentence. The two of them headed back to the Obelisk Academy dorms to inspect this supposed death trap. Shin handed the tome over, reminding his friend that it wouldn't budge unless he somehow resembled Rabel's rightful owner. Ji accepted the challenge and strained with everything he had, his arms shaking as he desperately tried to pry the cover open. Defeated, he handed it back, admitting the thing was practically welded shut and guessing there was some heavy seal on it. Utterly clueless on how to help, Ji told our guy to drop the whole crazy brain circle idea and decided to bounce. He marched out and slammed the door, leaving Shin alone with his weird new inheritance. Our guy picked the book back up, opened it without breaking a sweat, and realized something had changed. He spotted brand new hieroglyphs and seriously couldn't remember if that specific page had been blank earlier. An image showed Rybel floating in the sky, looking down at a successor who was apparently trying to use magic by slapping circles onto their heart. The text noted that this was totally the normal method for average folks. Shin questioned if the author was actually trying to say this standard method was flat out wrong. Suddenly, the book levitated into the air, completely startling our hero. The magical text announced that if he wanted to accept this legacy and become a disciple, he first had to obliterate the magic circle currently sitting in his heart. Then he was supposed to build a brand new one in his head, right as a few magical sparks shot out of the book and straight into his skull. The instructions were clear. After surviving all that, he was supposed to open the book one more time. Shin started quietly panicking, realizing this was way too intense to be a prank. Yet, the book just kept demanding he stick a magic circle in his brain. Mana, the actual fuel for magic, notoriously wrecked brains on contact, leading to mental collapse, or in the worst-case scenario, straight-up brain death. No matter how he spun it, the instructions basically read like a highly specific suicide note. Our guy crawled into bed, completely baffled as to who would ever willingly sign up for a deal like this. Back at school the next day, a professor pulled Shin aside and asked what was bugging him. The kid shoved the bizarre book at the professor and requested a professional opinion. The man grabbed the text and instantly recognized it as a legit ancient manuscript. A massive wave of historical energy practically rolled right off the cover. The teacher asked if Shin seriously wanted him to inspect it, and our boy suggested he just try getting it open first. Shin admitted he was trying to figure out if it was magically sealed or something else entirely, especially since wild rumors were already floating around campus. The professor dryly noted that worrying about schoolyard gossip wasn't a great look given Shin's current grades, but agreed to take a peek if the kid promised to actually study. After scanning the cover, the professor announced there wasn't a single drop of magic on it, advising our boy to quit chasing fairy tales and hit the books. Shin was completely floored. He had been praying for at least a tiny clue, especially since neither Suchan nor a literal professor could pry the thing open. It suddenly hit him that this insane brain magic situation might actually be 100% real. Later that evening, he sat perfectly still in his room, staring down the ancient book resting on the floor. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out the little package of pills his father had mailed over. Popping these would permanently delete the mana circle in his heart, aligning with his dad's demand to ditch practical magic and settle for being a smart theorist. But our guy had absolutely zero intention of walking away from spellcasting. He dumped 2 pills into his palm, desperately trying to get his shaking hands under control. Figuring he was already sitting on the absolute fringes of life, he tossed the pills back and swallowed. The boy collapsed to the floor in sheer agony as the magical circle anchored to his heart violently tore itself apart. It was pure torment and basically marked his death as a traditional mage, destroying any chance of turning back before he committed the ultimate taboo of injecting mana straight into his brain. The old version of himself had to die, so a completely new kind of magician could take the stage. The second the raw mana flooded into the grooves of his brain, the old heart pain faded, immediately replaced by a new agony so intense he thought he was actually going to die. While he questioned if this was the end, a sudden whisper echoed right against his ear. It was a voice literally woven from mana, and suddenly the spirits of light, darkness, wind, and earth swirled around him, whispering secrets as they merged with him. He absorbed the bright, ringing voices and echoing laughter, feeling like he was receiving some massive cosmic blessing. Eventually, Shin snapped back to reality, waking up on his bedroom floor with the weird book resting right beside him. He dragged himself up, stared at his hands in disbelief that he was actually still breathing, and turned to find the book sitting wide open. The crazy gamble had actually worked, and those previously blank pages were now covered in visible symbols. The strange voice rang out much clearer this time, officially congratulating him for surviving Step 1. Shin quickly learned that this mysterious text was known as the Book of Adrit. From that exact moment, the opening chapters of his own legend began being written through Adrit's pages. The disembodied voice formally handed down all of its magical knowledge to him. It initially referred to our boy as a successor from the future, but quickly corrected itself, because from now on, Shin was officially its personal student. Fast forward a few days, and our hero was slacking off in class, totally engrossed in his book because he just uncovered another secret. Who knew studying magic could actually be fun when Adret was packed exclusively with legendary hidden techniques? His first major lesson was that mana actually has a mind of its own, which is exactly why normal people get their brains scrambled when they let magic into their heads. It causes a massive clash of consciousness. That mental boxing match causes massive brain damage, earning mana its lethal reputation. But our guy's situation was a bit different. Their specific way of thinking somehow managed to block mana's natural will, entirely bypassing the brain damage. Shin started putting the pieces together, wondering if his brain's immunity to mana's will was the exact reason those AI magic chips kept short-circuiting in his head. He tried to dive back into the text, but the professor loudly interrupted. The teacher reminded the second years about their upcoming midterm exams, and casually dropped the bomb that a new rule was in play. Shin snapped to attention, genuinely surprised by the sudden update. The professor announced that starting this year, anyone who bombed the test wouldn't get a chance at a retake. They would just be immediately expelled. And to top it off, this brutal new policy had been suggested by the House of Magicians. The entire classroom started whispering, all assuming the defective kid was finally getting the boot. The professor cut his eyes to the side and noted that one of them was clearly already dancing on the edge of expulsion. Later on, Shin was wandering the streets, stressing over how ridiculously expensive it was to rent a simulation training room in the city. They wanted a massive 200,000 won per hour, a price tag that definitely made his wallet hurt. He walked into a facility and was immediately greeted by the guy working the front desk. Shin slapped down his cash for an hour, and the worker asked if he was planning on training solo. The attendant slid a keycard across the counter, pointing him toward room 14 and noting that the hologram instructions were waiting inside. Our guy grabbed the card and told the man to leave him alone, confidently claiming he knew the drill. The attendant recognized Shin as the famous kid from the prestigious magic house who couldn't use AI chips, silently pitying his terrible luck. Standing in the middle of room 14 in his training gear, the system announced the simulation was live and tasked him with crushing a pack of wolves. Instantly, a massive swarm of starry, galactic-looking animals spawned in, ready for a fight. They were just low-tier trash mobs, but facing 10 at once was still a decent hurdle. Back at school, the average clear time for this specific wolf test was 12 minutes and 32 seconds. Giving our boy the perfect benchmark to test his new book knowledge. There was literally no better way to figure out if this ancient magic actually worked in a real fight. Our guy instantly tapped into the magic of the Circle of Infinity. A massive loop of high-pressure water materialized around him, violently knocking the monsters backward. Shin hadn't felt this kind of raw power in ages and thought the sensation was absolutely incredible. While every other student was desperately relying on AI chips and heart circles to cast their spells, he was running a magic circle straight out of his brain, pumping mana aggressively through his entire body. Thanks to this crazy Circle of Infinity, the dormant power locked inside him was finally cut loose. The voice chimed in, telling him not to act so shocked over the basics, reminding him he had a massively long road ahead. It turns out the Infinity Circle was literally the ground floor of the Weitner magic style. Now our boy could snap spells into existence exactly how he pictured them in his head, and this was just the very first circle of the Weitner style, known as the Call of the Heart, representing merely the beginning of his journey. Shin wrapped up his session and headed for the exit, with the attendant politely telling him to come back soon. The worker dragged himself into room 14 to clean up, silently complaining about how tired he was. He wondered aloud exactly how failed geniuses spent their time training. Looking at the control panel, his jaw dropped. The kid had wiped the test in 6 minutes and 37 seconds, a time that practically rivaled international competitors. The attendant angrily kicked a piece of metal machinery, completely refusing to believe the incompetent kid pulled that off and deciding the machine was obviously busted. Meanwhile, Shin was happily skipping home with his trusty book, thrilled that the foundations of his legend were finally set. Actually building that infinity circle had put the guy through a seriously brutal ordeal. The stuff written in Adrid completely threw out every basic rule of magic he'd ever been taught. It claimed that mana located in the hands, feet, heart, and brain could all be forcefully bent to a person's will. Shin was incredibly confused by this concept, wondering how anyone was supposed to figure out such ridiculously vague instructions. Every time he felt like he was hovering right on the edge of a breakthrough, the realization would completely slip through his fingers. Traditional magical theory talked heavily about a wall of enlightenment, a brutal bottleneck where mages hit an invisible ceiling on their mana limits, a problem that plagued spellcasters across all eras. For the time being, our guy just needed to focus on constantly forcing mana through his veins, exactly as the book demanded. He couldn't help but wonder if just pumping energy was really the only thing he was supposed to be doing. Snapping out of a trance, he realized he'd been circulating mana for 10 straight hours, a stunt that should have left him completely dead on his feet. Yet, surprisingly, he didn't feel exhausted at all. A super cheerful G bumped into him right near the academy entrance. He immediately asked Shin if he was okay, pointing out that our boy looked seriously sleep-deprived. It was true. The guy now had to keep his mana actively circulating every single day, which was a massive headache since he was desperately trying to master this circle as fast as humanly possible. Back when he formed his second mana circle at just 12 years old, people called him a prodigy, and his dad started banking hard on his future. Yet here he was with just one lonely brain circle, completely clueless on how to level it up. He knew that smashing through that wall of enlightenment was absolutely mandatory if he wanted to progress. A memory popped up of something his father told him back when the old man still had faith in him. His dad claimed that the concept of an ideal was nothing more than chains weighing a person down. It was framed as a foolish illusion born purely from human arrogance, rendering the very idea of perfection a complete lie. Back in the present, Shin sat cross-legged on his mattress, totally zoned out in meditation as he tracked the magic pulsing through his own body. He felt the mana sliding through his arms and into his fingertips, acting like smooth electrical currents just waiting for an order. Energy moved perfectly through his heart and head on his command, proving that the secret ingredient to this style was entirely based on imperfection, total freedom, and wild imagination. He finally allowed himself to conjure magic without relying on the clunky, standard AI formulas, which massively cut down his cast times. Unfortunately, traditional AI spells always popped out looking exactly the same, making them incredibly predictable in a fight. Whitener's method, on the other hand, was completely unhinged and free-flowing, acting exactly like a random spark of inspiration. Now, our boy could effortlessly twist and mold his spells on the fly, practically treating pure magical energy like it was Play-Doh. It was a raw, algorithm-free magic style, though even at the absolute base level, it chewed through his physical stamina like crazy. Still, just having the ability to cast like this was mind-blowing and felt like stepping into an entirely new world of power. He knew that once he finally broke through that wall of enlightenment, his power ceiling would basically disappear. Suddenly, his professor barged into his room and ordered Shin to follow him, claiming they had a VIP guest waiting. Shin tossed his stuff aside and, highly confused, trailed right behind the professor. The teacher explained that Shin's father had personally traveled down to discuss some serious business, so they marched straight toward the meeting room. Approaching the reception area, his old man calmly ordered them to come in, radiating his usual intense, boss-level confidence. The professor stepped through the door first, loudly announcing he had retrieved Hyul, immediately sparking a tense vibe in the room. Our guy stepped up, flashing a tight smile while admitting it had been a hot minute since they last saw each other, and claiming he was happy for the face-to-face. Taking the hint, the professor offered a quick bow and bolted, leaving the two of them alone for this super heavy chat. Sitting right across from his son, the father noted that Shin was stubbornly still going to classes, despite basically failing everything. He pointed out this clearly meant our boy had rejected the metaphorical poison pill he'd tried to force on him regarding his future. Shin fired back that he was sticking around because his magic was actually improving rapidly, and he fully intended to show off his new skills. The man just stared at him in complete bewilderment, wondering if his kid was still actually chasing these totally delusional fantasies. Shin Hyul firmly stated that yes, he was, and that he was still completely set on becoming the strongest mage of his generation. This bold claim completely caught his dad off guard, especially since Shin was glaring at him with zero hesitation. Sighing like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders, the man pointed out that Shin had completely wasted an entire year. He demanded that the kid finally wake up and smell reality. He argued that hard work didn't mean a thing if Shin's body kept violently rejecting the AI interactive magic. Because of that fatal flaw, his dad insisted he would never be a genuine, combat-ready magician. The man suggested that since the kid still had a massive brain, he should ditch these pipe dreams and pivot to magical theory to make himself actually useful. Shin completely cut him off, flatly stating his stance hadn't shifted an inch since their last argument. He promised he was never, ever quitting magic. Living some boring, average life held exactly zero appeal for him. His actual goal was still sitting right at the head of the House of Magic. His dad fired back that becoming a legendary mage or running the 8 families wasn't something you could just wish into existence. Shin simply smirked and promised he was about to prove it out on the battlefield. The old man was utterly lost, wondering how a kid barely scraping by and facing expulsion thought he was going to prove anything. Our guy declared he was going to snag a top 10 spot in the upcoming exams. He put his money where his mouth was. If he failed, he'd drop out and become the desk jockey theorist his dad wanted. But if he pulled it off, he demanded his dad finally treat him like a real mage and start backing him up properly. The father dryly noted that whatever tiny wins Shin had recently scraped together had clearly inflated his ego to dangerous levels. Throwing his coat back on, the man headed for the door, tossing over his shoulder that he sincerely hoped his son wasn't just talking trash. A couple of days later, the professor announced the midterm format was officially locked in. The classroom immediately started buzzing, with kids debating whether it would be team fights, while some prayed for monster hunting. The professor completely crushed those hopes, revealing they were looking at brutal one-on-one student duels. The whole bloodbath was scheduled to drag out over 3 intense days. To make it even more stressful, official talent scouts from the Magic Tower were dropping in starting at the 16th round. Everyone needed to bring their absolute A game, and Shin knew this was his golden ticket. The whole class practically went into cardiac arrest over the duel announcement, realizing the Tower Scouts made this the highest stakes exam ever. Shin mused that the whole school was losing its mind, figuring the Tower reps would naturally drag the media along with them. The Magic Tower was basically an international super guild founded by the world's best, carrying the political weight of an entire country, and basically every student would sell their soul to get in. Right on cue, Baek Sahyuk swaggered over and immediately started calling our boy defective. Baek was seriously annoying, but sadly he was also ranked near the very top of the second-year class. The loudmouth announced that he was going to be Shin's round 1 opponent. He taunted our hero, asking if he was already choking on the bitter taste of defeat. Baek was extremely confident he was about to completely erase the embarrassing incident from 5 years ago. Exactly half a decade prior, they'd both made it to the finals of a major youth tournament. Back then, Shin had absolutely humiliated Baek without taking a single hit, slapping the kid with a massive loser reputation. Ever since Shin's AI magic issues popped up, Baek had made it his personal mission to torment our guy 24/7. Baek helpfully pointed out the new expulsion rule, offering to knock Shin out cold so he wouldn't have to watch his own academic funeral. His squad cracked up, telling Shin to prep his crying pillow since he was drawing the worst possible opening matchup. Shin, however, figured this was a massive stroke of luck to show off, and calmly asked why on earth he would be scared. He promised he was going to milk this fight for all it was worth, a statement that massively threw Baek off his rhythm. By now, half the cafeteria was staring at them and whispering. Baek started shouting, furious that this broken reject actually thought he stood a chance. He ordered Shin to stop living in a fantasy world, accusing him of entirely forgetting his place at the bottom of the food chain. Shin just casually recalled that Baek had barked exactly like this 5 years ago, right before getting completely destroyed. Clearly, the guy hadn't learned a single lesson. Our boy let out a laugh, guessing Baek was still crying over that old beatdown, and casually called him a loser to his face. That completely broke Baek's brain. He lunged forward, grabbed Shin by the collar, and started spitting insults. Shin coolly noted that coasting on his family's money hadn't changed a thing, and promised there would always be a bigger fish ready to stomp him. Declaring that true geniuses never lose their touch, Shin subtly rubbed his amulet. He promised to leave a permanent mark on Baek this time, advising him to brace for impact. Having delivered his mic drop, our guy just spun around and walked off. Baek was left vibrating with rage and aggressively chewing his nails, vowing to literally incinerate this arrogant jerk into a pile of ash. The very next morning, the media exploded with headlines about the epic return of the fallen genius Shin Hae-yul, getting everyone guessing if this was a comeback tour or his final swan song. His name was plastered absolutely everywhere, strongly suggesting Baek's rich family had heavily bribed journalists and screamed at the school board. Knowing Baek's style, it was a totally obvious dirty play. But Shin planned to use the midterms to remind the world that a real genius never actually falls off. As far as he was concerned, the bigger the spotlight, the better the show. Suddenly, the cell phone resting on his desk started buzzing. Shin picked it up to hear his father asking if he'd caught the morning headlines yet. When Shin confirmed he had, his dad ordered him to completely ignore the press. His old man demanded to know if Shin had actively stirred this pot, and our boy happily admitted he'd totally baited Baek into it. He explained it was a calculated move to draw a crowd, but his dad coldly reminded him that taking his bet didn't mean he actually believed in him. To the House of Magic, the hype was completely meaningless. The father flat out stated he fully expected Shin to lose, complaining that this media circus was just dragging their family name through the mud for absolutely zero reason. Shin argued that the public already treated him like an exiled reject anyway, and while he offered a quick fake apology, he noted nobody actually cared about the family's so-called reputation damage. His dad growled that even minor damage was still damage. He sternly reminded our boy that he carried the heavy weight of the Magic House's name everywhere he went. Shin nodded along but insisted these tiny PR issues were nothing compared to the massive payout waiting at the end. The father was completely baffled, totally unable to see how his failing son winning a single school match could possibly benefit their legendary dynasty. Shin confidently laid it out. The massive benefit was that the soon-to-be greatest mage alive was officially representing their family. He made it crystal clear he wasn't just aiming to be the best in their house, but was planning to completely eclipse the entire global magic community. Slumping back into his fancy chair, the father stared at his son, noting his terrifying ambition rivaled that of a literal magic tower lord. The old man admitted that, win or lose, Shin had clearly locked in his path, which prompted our boy to drop a rare thank you for the tough love. But the dad immediately killed the mood, warning that if Shin lost and embarrassed the family again, the fallout would be absolutely catastrophic. With that ominous threat hanging in the air, his dad hung up, leaving our guy staring at his phone and processing just how insane the stakes had gotten. He dropped onto his mattress, took a massive breath, and fully accepted that his crazy gamble required him to go absolutely all out. Exam day finally rolled around, packing the massive arena with students practically vibrating with anxiety and hype. Our hero was down on the arena floor, stretching out, when Beck marched over, aggressively looking for a pre-fight shouting match. Beck mockingly asked if Shin was enjoying his 15 minutes of fake fame, joking that the media was treating him like some returning god. He loudly reminded everyone in earshot that Shin was totally incapable of casting spells properly, and was just setting himself up as a massive laughingstock. Shin just flashed a grin, predicting that Beck was the only one walking out of this arena completely humiliated after celebrating way too early. He even tossed out a quick thank you, noting that Beck had walked face-first into a trap without even realizing it. Shin acknowledged the bad blood between them, but promised a super quick beatdown, kindly asking Beck not to cry about it later. To add insult to injury, Shin announced he was only going to need basic first circle spells to wipe the floor with him. Beck's face turned completely red as he screamed that Shin was completely delusional for talking so much trash. Right before they could throw hands, the ref blew his whistle, officially kicking off the second-year midterms. He dropped his hand and screamed at them to start fighting. Beck instantly started weaving a spell, loudly promising to put our boy in the ground. A glowing hologram popped up right in front of him, instantly spitting out a blazing fireball. It zoomed straight for Shin's face, but our guy barely even moved, lazily tilting his head to dodge it. Suddenly, the AI chip jammed into Beck's neck, started humming violently and glowing with intense energy. The angry kid unleashed a heavy third circle spell literally just called Explosion. A massive blast rocked Shin's side of the arena, instantly swallowing him in a thick cloud of black smoke. Beck started cackling, yelling that Shin needed to stop pretending he was some untouchable god. His laugh completely died when the smoke cleared, revealing our guy standing there without a single scratch, leaving Beck completely stumped. Panicking slightly, Beck activated 3 separate holograms that immediately launched a trio of fast fireballs. Shin didn't even blink, looking entirely bored as he casually started throwing together a water spell. A towering wall of water erupted from the arena floor, swallowing the incoming fireballs like they were absolutely nothing. Beck's jaw practically hit the floor, since that attack was his absolute favorite, guaranteed kill move. Meanwhile, Shin had effortlessly brushed it off, and now streams of water were orbiting him like personal bodyguards. Up in the VIP box, a fancy-looking man was staring at the fight in complete confusion, desperately trying to figure out what he just witnessed. After all, he knew for a fact that was just low-level first circle magic. Yet Shin had instantly snapped it into existence. The woman standing beside the VIP wondered aloud why he had ditched his critical blue tower duties just to watch some kids fight. She asked if he was secretly hoarding some inside info on Hyul's bizarre casting style. The man denied it, claiming he just read the morning paper and got curious enough about the fallen genius to show up. The woman raised an eyebrow, heavily doubting it was just a random coincidence. She pointed out that if the press found out the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower, an elite 8th Circle mage, was crashing a high school tournament, the rumors would go completely out of control. He was totally aware of the risk, considering he was Kim Kan-un, one of the most powerful people on the planet. That massive reputation was exactly why he demanded a private VIP box in the first place. Suddenly, they heard footsteps, and Kim Kan-un spun around to see who was crashing their private room. He offered a polite greeting, internally completely shocked that this specific guest had also decided to show up. Back down in the dirt, Shin was just standing there looking cool while steam rolled off his water shields. Beck was having a mental breakdown, completely unable to process how his heavy third circle explosion got totally stuffed by a basic first circle puddle. To make it worse, our guy was firing off spells at a speed that honestly looked like a glitch in the Matrix. Shin smirked and asked his panicking opponent if he desperately wanted the secret to his insane casting speed. Beck just screamed at him to shut up, demanding that he die quietly. He rapidly smashed 3 magical panels, unleashing another barrage of explosive fireballs. The explosives slammed directly into Shin's position, setting off a massive chain reaction that shook the entire stadium and kicked up a massive dust cloud. Beck proudly puffed out his chest, bragging that he knew Shin was weak the second he stopped running his mouth about that first circle trash. But the dust settled to reveal Shin holding off the entire inferno with just one hand, looking slightly bored and completely unbothered, which sent a shockwave of disbelief through the crowd. Without missing a beat, our boy whipped up a blinding magical spear and launched it straight at Beck's face with everything he had. The glowing weapon blew right past Beck's ear, completely missing him, much to the total confusion of the audience. The spectators were absolutely stunned that Shin had casually forged a lethal spear out of thin air, like he was just tossing a baseball. It was completely obvious now that Beck's massive explosions hadn't even singed our hero, as if Shin had some invisible god-tier armor. Seeing red, Beck started swearing at Shin, absolutely furious that this guy was genuinely trying to beat him using the lowest tier of magic. Shin casually spun up a second wind spear, reminding Beck that he never bluffs and was more than ready to keep tossing them. He launched the second spear, but Beck panicked and threw up a magical shield just in time to deflect the worst of it. Beck was sweating now, wondering where Shin found all this confidence, and assumed the loser had just spent a year grinding his cast speed. He was still trying to convince himself Shin was trash, right up until a third spear buzzed incredibly close to his head, forcing him to actually take this seriously. A glancing blow clipped Beck's shoulder, making him grab the wound in a mix of sharp pain and massive annoyance. He was completely focused on his shoulder and totally missed the fact that the spear had magically U-turned right behind him. Up in the VIP suite, Kim Kanun and his assistant were leaning practically against the glass, completely mesmerized by the fight. Shin kept channeling wind magic, taunting Beck and asking if he seriously hadn't figured out the trick yet. Our boy decided he was done playing around, and it was finally time to show the crowd what a real monster looked like. Pushing his mana, Shin shaped the swirling wind into a massive glowing eagle that looked absolutely majestic. The wind bird flared its magical wings and dive-bombed Beck at a speed that shouldn't have been physically possible. Beck stared at the sky in pure horror, swearing the original wind spear had literally duplicated itself in midair. Shin completely agreed with him, casually noting that standard magic rules say you absolutely cannot do that. But he threw in a massive however, bragging that standard rules didn't apply to him, and now Beck had to deal with 4 of these homing birds. Annoyed and terrified, Beck clicked his tongue and desperately threw up a heavy magical barrier. 3 of the wind eagles slammed violently into the shield and shattered into harmless breezes. Beck mentally cheered, reassuring himself that first circle attacks were still just low-level garbage he could easily block. But before he could even celebrate, the 4th eagle bypassed his shield completely and smashed directly into his spine. Beck hit the dirt hard, realizing that one of the clones had completely ignored the laws of physics and changed directions. Shin offered some free advice, pointing out that overanalyzing the math is great, but getting distracted mid-fight is a guaranteed way to lose. He immediately started spinning up an entire flock of magical birds, making it clear the real assault was just getting started. Scrambling to his feet, Beck decided his only hope was to sprint backward and outrange the U-turning clones. He banked entirely on the assumption that a low-level spell had a super short leash. In his head, he just had to survive the initial burst, step back, and the birds would fizzle out. Shin complimented the strategy, but coldly promised it wasn't going to save him. He brought his hands together in a weird new seal, and a blinding ball of magical energy flared between his palms. A completely massive bird, looking more like a literal tornado with wings, ripped its way into the sky. Watching from above, Kim Kan-un was visibly sweating, utterly amazed at the kid's non-existent cast times. What really blew the Tower Lord's mind was how Shin was daisy-chaining spells and aggressively hacking their flight paths mid-air. Completely stunned, he spun around to ask the newly arrived VIP, Mr. Shin In-hyuk, what he thought about this absolute circus. This newcomer wasn't just anybody. He was the head of a legendary magic family and another terrifying 8th Circle wizard. The female assistant chimed in, confirming that Hyul's combat style was basically taking a sledgehammer to the spell source code. She rattled off the standard rules, noting a hard return radius of exactly 37.44 meters, and a strict speed limit of 116 kilometers per hour. She added that standard spells are strictly one and done on U-turns. If a target steps past 38 meters, the spell instantly fails because the code can't adjust. Basically, since everyone is normally forced to play by these math rules, duels usually come down to intense games of magical chess. When two mages are stuck using predictable spells, victory goes to whoever has the best reflexes and guessing skills. It was supposed to work exactly like balancing a video game, but Waitner's crazy style threw the entire rulebook straight into the garbage. Down in the arena, Beck got absolutely flattened by the giant bird, completely devastated that a first circle scrub was actually beating him to death. Shin casually asked if Beck was finally regretting laughing at the first circle, pointing out that his fancy third-tier explosions had done 0 damage. He dropped a cold piece of wisdom, noting you can absolutely murder someone with a cheap pen if you actually know where to stab them. Shin's hand started glowing with a new, highly suspicious aura, and Beck immediately recognized the incoming threat. It was literally just basic water magic again. But our guy proved you don't need a flashy dragon laser to finish a fight. The water condensed into a brutal, highly pressurized bubble that slammed entirely over Beck's head, cutting off his oxygen. Normally, the school's fancy combat uniforms are supposed to deploy a life-saving safety bubble before things get this lethal. But whatever Shin did completely short-circuited the safety tech, rendering it completely useless. Beck was now thrashing wildly on the arena floor, clawing desperately at his own face, trying to pop the water bubble as he started suffocating. The entire stadium, including the absolute deer-in-headlights referee, sat in dead silence watching Beck drown on dry land. Shin politely looked at the ref and suggested they call it here, offering to keep drowning the guy if the ref disagreed. Snapping out of his trance, the referee practically blew his whistle through his teeth and wildly waved his arms to stop the bloodbath. The match was officially called, stamping Shin Hyul as the absolute undisputed winner. Medics instantly rushed the field, hauling a completely unconscious and heavily traumatized Beck away on a stretcher. Shin turned and walked out of the stadium, staring down at his hands with a heavy wave of nostalgia hitting him. He had finally remembered what it felt like to be a real monster on the battlefield, and he absolutely loved it. Up in the VIP halls, Kim Kang-eun was pacing intensely next to his assistant. He couldn't stop asking if they had just witnessed the mythical supernova magic. The Tower Lord looked like a kid in a candy store, completely obsessed with the impossible show he'd just seen. He decided right then and there he needed to know every single detail about Shin Hyul's existence. Meanwhile, Ji practically kicked Shin's dorm door off the hinges, screaming about the massive victory. He demanded to know what kind of insane, secret training montage Shin had gone through to suddenly unleash that god-tier power. Ji ranted that the wind spears were a piece of art, and the U-turn combos were so fast they made his head spin. Shin leaned back and playfully asked if his buddy actually wanted the classified details of his new power. When Ji violently nodded yes, our guy just flashed an annoying smirk and claimed it was a closely guarded magic secret. Trying to dodge the interrogation, Hyul flipped the script and asked if Ji had seen the massive media storm exploding online. The news networks had already dropped Shin's post-match interview, and Ji was literally dying to know how Shin explained the crazy spellcasting. The broadcast showed a reporter aggressively shoving a mic at Shin, demanding to know the secret behind that blistering cast speed. They basically begged him to explain the U-turning eagle combo that looked like a blatant rule violation. Suddenly, Kim Kang-eun stepped directly into the camera frame and smoothly offered to field that exact question. He flashed a $1 million smile, dropped his title as a Blue Magic Tower 8th Circle heavyweight, and admitted he was totally spying on the match. He confidently declared that Shin was clearly using high-level memorization magic, an advanced technique usually locked behind the 4th circle. Seeing the reporters look completely lost, the Tower Lord raised his hand and instantly snapped a fireball into existence to demonstrate. He explained that this top-tier skill lets a mage preload a spell structure in their head and fire it instantly, totally bypassing normal cast times. When a reporter foolishly asked why everyone didn't just use this cheat code, Kanan sighed and explained it only works on spells 3 full tiers below the caster's maximum level. He dramatically turned to Hyul and asked if his assessment was correct, to which our boy happily nodded along. Shin had spent the whole interview desperately trying not to say the word whitener on live TV, so Kamen's convenient excuse was an absolute lifesaver. The sweaty reporter practically dropped his mic, realizing this meant a second-year high school kid was officially sitting at the fourth circle. Kanan looked at the reporter like he was stupid and confirmed it was blatantly obvious to anyone with eyes. Absolute chaos erupted in the press pool, with cameras flashing blindly as reporters fought to get the shot. This news was a global earthquake, since hitting the fourth tier at Shin's age was a historical speedrun that rivaled the actual Tower Lords. Back in the dorm, G stared wildly at his friend and asked if he was seriously a fourth circle monster now, but quickly realized he should probably just let it go for now. On the broadcast, another journalist had screamed out a question, asking how Shin bypassed the hard-coded U-turn rules. The great Kim Kang-eun actually started sweating, desperately trying to invent a plausible lie for that one. Shin heroically grabbed the mic to save him, claiming the source code rules were actually incredibly easy to bend. He casually explained that all he had to do was crack open the spell formula and manually rewrite the math on the fly. Kanan immediately interrupted, loudly stating that rewriting live magic was literally impossible for a human brain. The Tower Lord compared it to trying to bolt wings onto a moving car and expecting it to instantly fly, completely rejecting the idea. He noted that if Shin's brain hadn't violently rejected the AI chips, he would have never developed this insane manual workaround. Right on camera, Shin decided to prove it, instantly spinning up a swarm of glowing, heavily modified magical butterflies. He humbly called it a special modified variant, while Kanan stared at the butterflies like he was witnessing a literal miracle. The elite Tower Lord fully realized he was looking at a historical revolution, and the entire magic meta was about to get flipped upside down. Back in the dorm, G threw his hands up and asked if Shin actually expected him to buy that ridiculous live rewrite excuse. Shin shot back, asking if G had a better explanation, though G just laughed it off, genuinely thrilled his friend wasn't the school punching bag anymore. Checking his watch, G announced he needed to bounce and get back to his own room. He mumbled something about needing severe mental preparation for his own brutal matchup scheduled for tomorrow. Shin raised an eyebrow, slightly thrown off by G's sudden serious tone, but decided not to pry. The next morning, the entire student body crammed back into the Obelisk Academy arena for day 2. Down on the dirt, G was totally focused, heavily playing keep away from his opponent. Watching from the stands, Shin instantly realized this girl was the absolute nightmare matchup his buddy had been stressing over. The girl, Adela Stewart, aggressively launched a high-level moon bullet straight at G's face. The Stewart family was a French dynasty acting as the literal divine guardians of Korea, producing legendary prodigies from a massive magical bloodline. Her specific brand of Daewoo magic was completely unique and widely considered impossible to copy. Her family had somehow hacked their family magic to infuse everything with a massively destructive lunar attribute. As Adela started chaining her next attack, Suchan panicked and threw up a heavy barricade of magical shields, but Adela casually fired off a volley of glowing arrows that shredded G's defenses like they were made of wet paper. Seeing G entirely exposed, the referee immediately blew the whistle and called the match before someone died. Taking the easy win, Adela pulled her hair out of its ponytail, looking completely unfazed by the absolute beating she just delivered. Her family's signature blend of light and dark magic constantly gave off an eerie glow that looked exactly like moonlight. That specific style completely bypassed all standard range and power limits found in normal magic databases. Looking at the wrecked arena, Shin totally understood why trying to fight her was basically a guaranteed death sentence. Suddenly, Shin noticed that she was looking straight at him. He couldn't believe if she had just looked at him or if it was just his imagination. G looked very tired, but his friend praised him for his worthy performance. Of all the possible opponents, he was given Adela, and it was a real failure. G asked his friend if he had won his second fight, and he answered in the affirmative. This meant that his next opponent was Adela, and at that moment, the girl came up to him and praised him for a great fight. G thanked her shyly and added that he had learned a lot from this fight. Adela asked Hyul if he had really become a real wizard. She admitted that she entered the academy in the hope that he would help her regain her lost memories. Adela and Hyul knew each other even before entering the Academy of Magicians, because their houses had a strong connection with the House of Divine Battles. The guy often crossed paths with Adela at events, and their relationship can be described in one word: rivals. Adela gave up her studies in France to join Obelisk and defeat him. After he proved unsuitable for interactive magic, the girl no longer spoke to him. He was branded a scumbag, and she lost her long-awaited rival. Shin admitted that he was not yet able to provide her with worthy competition. Adela left, saying that everything would be decided in battle. G put his hand on his friend's shoulder and asked if everything would be okay. When the guy replied that he didn't understand the question, Ji was in complete shock. His next opponent was Adela Stewart herself. Shin Hyul was stunned to hear this. Everyone gathered in the arena because the battle between Adela and Hyul was about to begin. The girl calmly waited for the battle to begin, and having warmed up, was ready for the fight. Everyone was surprised why the guy hadn't shown up yet. Was he scared? There was a lot of talk about him in interviews, but he was just making a big splash and had no chance against Adela. The referee looked at her watch and, according to the rules, declared Adela Stewart the winner. At that moment, Shin ran in, adjusting his jacket, all in sweat, and asked to stop. He smiled and apologized for being late. The judge was amazed that he had finally appeared and asked where he had been, but there was no time for explanations. He decided to punish him for being late by depriving him of a break. The judge ordered everyone to take their positions. Adela asked if she could ask the reason for his lateness. Shin closed his eyes and said that nothing special had happened. A loop of water formed around him as he prepared for battle. He admitted that the girl was strong and he needed to prepare for the fight. He promised that the fight would be interesting, but she doubted that anything could have changed in a day. She felt that the Hyul standing in front of her now was different from the one from yesterday. She hoped to see his true gift. Shin extended his hand forward and warned that it was better to give it his all right away. The referee announced the start of the match. The girl created a sphere above herself, similar to the moon. She then formed her hands into a pistol shape and cast the Flame Revolver spell. The sphere on her fingers flared and shone with a bright light. 3 magic circles appeared in front of her, from which fiery rays burst forth. Shin raised his hand up and focused his energy, using wind magic to prepare to repel the attack. A strong but small hurricane instantly dispersed the enemy's approaching fire spheres. After this, Adela immediately used her spell called Earth Needles. The ground beneath Kyle's feet cracked, and sharp stone spikes quickly erupted from the cracks. Shin reacted instantly and, tensing every muscle, jumped back to avoid the attack. The girl noticed that while he was in the air, he would not be able to completely dodge her blow. She assumed a cross-shaped combat stance and channeled her powers into an airstrike spell. Hyul understood that this was a special attack, designed for opponents in the airstream. Most magicians believed that it was almost impossible to avoid such a spell, but Shin turned out to be more cunning and managed to create a magical barrier right under his feet while in the air. Spectators were amazed to see how he was able to erect a defense in the air during the fight. Adela, having witnessed this, could not believe her own eyes at such a reception. He used the reversible barrier as a solid support to maintain his position. Hyul once again proved that he possesses incredible magical intuition and tactical thinking. The secret attribute of the House of Divine Guardians is the moon, and to defeat it, you must give everything. To achieve this, he even decided to use the power of the sun itself in the fight. Adela's eyes were momentarily blinded by the bright rays of the sun. She realized that he was preparing an attack using this light. Now he was above her, and she could only defend herself. She used the Great Cage magic, and a barrier appeared in front of her. Shin used wind magic, and a sword appeared in his hand. He flew closer to her and hit the barrier. It was a first circle spell used as a third circle defensive spell, and she acted carefully. After that, the guy jumped back, and the sword in his hands disappeared. Adela dropped her barrier and realized it was now her turn to act, but she noticed that she couldn't move because her leg was tied with concrete. She looked at this place in surprise. She immediately realized that it was a binding to the earth, but she did not know when he had managed to impose it. This couldn't be because he used it as soon as he landed. He acted so quickly that she couldn't keep up with his movements. Shin wasted no time and began casting a spell as a shimmering beam began to swirl around him. He used a magic charge and numerous water beams gathered in his hand. Adela released a beam of fire from her hand and destroyed the concrete on her leg. At this time, Shin had already created 3 huge spheres around himself. These spheres turned into dolphins from the water and rushed towards the girl. Adela couldn't think of anything else to do but put a shield in front of herself. As soon as the dolphins reached the surface, they crashed into the shield and were covered in water. The girl thought that everything would be easier than she expected. She remembered the news saying he had used 4th circle memorization magic. Memorization only allowed one to use spells 3 levels lower than the current one, and since Hyul was a 4th level mage, only the 1st level was available to him. He can't defeat Adela with just 1st circle spells. The girl didn't notice how a wind bird landed next to her, almost hitting her. She didn't understand when the guy managed to activate this spell. Perhaps he hid this modified version of the air spear in her sunblind spot. She ended up getting hit with a small blow and screaming in intense pain. Her hair came loose and she fell to the ground in front of him. Shin said that it was a long time ago and she probably already forgot who she was fighting. Adela lay on the floor and looked angrily at her opponent. At this time, Kanan's assistant said that the boy's fighting instincts exceeded all expectations. He used a delayed attack, dodged, and applied ground bind at the same time, perhaps planning it all along. He dodged the blow in midair, forcing Adela to attack. He then used the barrier as a support to gain height, standing with his back to the sun and obscuring the girl's visibility. At this moment, he instantly activated the long-term activation spell through memorization and created a wind spear. Immediately after the descent, he used the air to focus Adela's attention. At the same time, he created a bond with the ground, pretending that he was simply landing. And while the girl was turning away from the sun, a pre-calibrated spear of wind struck her back. The nickname First Circle Master Mage, given to him just a couple of days ago, now took on meaning. His father sat in his chair and didn't understand what was wrong with it. The arena was slightly damaged, and the two opponents stood looking at each other. Shin and Hyuk noted that, despite the advantage, the guy was unable to deliver the decisive blow. That is, he cannot complete the task. Moreover, Adela hasn't even used her main trump card yet. The girl admitted that it was impressive, and said that it even reminded her of a bummer. She decided that from now on, she would fight with all seriousness. Shin assumed a fighting stance, glad that things had finally reached this point. The moon attribute is a special magic of the greatest house of divine guardians called Halo. A huge magic circle with the phases of the moon appeared above the girl, and the ground beneath her feet began to crumble, creating a dangerous crack. Shin shielded her face from the bright light with her bent elbow, trying not to go blind. Another magic circle appeared in the sky, from which a beam emanated, falling directly on the girl. Shin In-hyuk stood up from his chair and slowly walked towards the exit of the hall. Kim Kan-eun asked him why he was already leaving the fight. The man replied that the battle was over and there was nothing more to see. But suddenly, everyone heard a strange sound and turned towards the arena. The girl held a tablet in her hands and said in surprise that this couldn't be. Ji Soo-chan, who was sitting nearby and watching the fight, was suddenly stunned. Adela suddenly stopped casting her spell and exclaimed that everything that was happening was unthinkable. A magic circle with a pentagram and fire symbols appeared behind the guy. He folded his hands, and a red-hot ball of the flame volcano spell appeared in them. Adela immediately realized that this was second circle magic and was very surprised. After all, the guy had previously claimed that he was late because he was preparing for the fight. Adela noted that memorization only allows one to use the first circle of magic. She wondered if he had somehow reached the fifth circle. Shin just smiled silently with a mischievous expression on his face. The night before, he was in the Obelisk student dormitory. He sat on the bed in the lotus position and looked at the book lying in front of him. Adela was not an opponent that could be defeated with only first circle magic. Even Shin's own fighting style was no match for her magic. He opened the book and admitted to himself that he planned to fight when he became strong. Something mysterious and promising had opened up on Adred's new page, which, if successfully applied, could turn out to be truly wonderful. The text spoke of the need to infuse mana into a special magical formula capable of awakening hidden powers. This mysterious formula, according to the author, could reveal new, previously unseen facets of reality itself. The guy became incredibly curious about what kind of effect such an unusual spell could produce. He decided it was time to cast aside his doubts and fears, and, concentrating, began to pronounce the magic words. After these words, he stretched out his hand and touched the open page of the ancient book with his palm. A complex pentagram slowly appeared on the yellowed page, and the boy's heart filled with delight. However, soon a blinding glow spread, so bright that he was forced to close his eyes tightly. Just a couple of seconds later, the beam in the book intensified, and pieces of pages flew out of it. The boy opened his eyes and was amazed to find himself in a place with many bookshelves. Shin Ha-yul looked around and couldn't figure out where he was. Suddenly, someone told him that he had arrived at the first test page. In front of him stood a girl in an unusual outfit named Alpha, the guide of the first test page. This was the first test hidden inside the Idred. Shin immediately realized that he was inside the book. It was not a simple movement, but a spatial dimension inside the book. He smiled and noted to himself that all this was incredible. The girl explained that this test would test his intentions as a successor. She extended her hands forward and added that the details would be revealed at the start. If he successfully passes the test, pages 18 through 31 will open, containing the magic of the second circle. To advance to the next circle of magic, He must pass this test. Alpha asked if he wanted to begin the mission, and Shin, without hesitation, stated that he wanted to begin immediately. Alpha bowed and made it clear that she understood everything. Then she began to dissolve into thin air and said that the test was beginning. The girl closed her eyes, and a multitude of bright petals appeared around her. She appears to be human, but she is a magical entity. Who would have thought? Suddenly, a strange voice appears and says that it will explain the details of the test. Shin immediately realizes that this is the voice of his teacher. The gem before it is called elemental and contains an indefinite number of natural elements, chaotically mixed. The guy's task is to establish the final order of mana in the stone. Shin was surprised and couldn't understand what this meant. Wild elemental stones are a delicate material, and their mana must be handled with extreme caution. There are only 4 types inside it, and their mixing creates chaos. How can he organize it? Essentially, it's like a mixture of grains of sand, salt, sugar, and pepper that somehow need to be separated. This is no joke, and only a skilled master of mind techniques can cope with it. But what is happening seems incredibly intriguing to him, and so he decides that he is ready to take a risk and try his hand. Concentrating and using the mind technique, he feels a blazing fire of determination blaze in his eyes. A scattering of bright sparks is born right in front of him, and then soft blue rays of magic begin to flow through the air. Magical waves emanate from the crystal, transforming into an infinity shape and intertwining. Shin tenses up more and tries to concentrate. Suddenly, the stone in his hands becomes even bigger and flies off to the side. The force is so great that Shin can't withstand it and is pushed towards the cabinets. He falls to the floor, and one book lands on his head, because any extra fluctuation of mana creates a high wave, and one must act carefully. Shin tried to separate the mana, but it was so mixed there that it was difficult to separate. However, he has a great idea, and he will try, no matter how long it takes. Having completely forgotten about time, the guy tried again and again to organize the flows. The slightest mental lapse forced me to start all over again every time. Then he finally managed to do it and divided the elemental stone mana. The teacher's voice congratulated him and said that he had passed the test. Now that he has mastered the technique of the mind, the second circle, the circle of resonance, will open up to him, and new recordings of Adred will also become available to him. A couple of seconds later, the guy wakes up in his bed. He remembers everything that happened and realizes that he has returned. First of all, he opens the book and rejoices because he will finally form the second magic circle. Before the competition begins, he will have fully mastered his spell. Adela doesn't lose hope and uses the halo magic. The guy stands motionless in a fighting stance, while beams of magic fly around him and the ground beneath him collapses. The girl creates magic circles above him, from which huge beams emerge and crash right into the area where Shin is standing, and the ground there breaks and stones fly. Ji watches all this and worries because it seems that this is the limit for Hyul. The girl casually brushes her hair back and says that the match is over. But how was he able to advance so much in such a short period of time? Who is this guy, really? Although that's all, the Gine she was chasing is no more. Adela is already turning around and leaving when she suddenly hears a strange sound. She turns around in surprise and doesn't understand what it was. Shin activates the second circle, Resonance Activation. He uses the magic Darkness Blindness, and 2 spheres of different colors appear in his hands. This is the fusion of 2 circles of infinity. From the magic circle behind him, 2 magical hands emerge. With the power of free will, the boy asks them to become his arms and legs. Kanun and Hyuk watch this with surprise and are in complete shock. Adela is also trying to understand what is happening. The very same rays that the girl created are easily pushed apart by huge hands. Shin uses fire volcano magic and directs it towards the enemy. Adela reacts instantly and tries to cast a protective spell. But the guy is faster and uses Resonance version 1, which causes a huge weapon to appear in the air. The girl understands that she is unable to block it. She starts casting spells again and is glad that the guy has returned and will be her target again. The huge weapon charges and fires fire bullets. The judge stands to the side and in complete shock covers his face with his hands to keep dust from getting into his mouth. The girl stands for a while and then, exhausted, falls onto the broken floor. Shin also can't stand it, as he has spent a lot of energy and falls to his knees tired. The referee declares the fight over and Shin Hyul is the winner. In-hyuk takes another step, intending to leave, and Kang-gun immediately notices his movement. The man calmly says that he is obliged to fulfill his promised obligations. Kanan replies that he understands everything, and a small, understanding smile appears on his face. He really is a man of his word. Everything turned out exactly as he expected. Shin Hyul goes out into the hall, changes his clothes, and realizes that he is very exhausted. The resonance of the second circle of infinity synchronized with the first circle in his head and strengthened his magic. Lunar attribute magic is a hybrid that combines the range of light magic and the power of dark magic. In other words, if you pour dark magic into it, breaking the proportions, the range of destruction will be greatly reduced. However, even with more advanced dark magic, the guy was unable to cope with the halo. Moon magic is a secret technique of the House of Divine Guardians and cannot be learned easily. But after only a quick glance at the magic formula back then, the guy managed it thanks to his perfect mana control. The resonance circle allowed him to decipher the magic formula with incredible precision, deciphering the very structure of the spell. And he was only able to achieve such mana control by dismantling the elemental stone. Without all this, he would only have dreamed of defeating Adela. And the guy sits, looking away in surprise. Suddenly, Kim Kanun approaches him from the side. Shin looks at him with surprised eyes and realizes that this is the Lord of the Tower. The man says that he came to talk specifically to him. And now they were sitting together opposite each other in Kim Kang-eun's office. The man apologized for disturbing Shin because he was probably tired and he was watching the match, and it was just an incredible fight. Shin Hyul thanked him almost emotionlessly. Kanan looked at the girl and said that he would get straight to the point. He asked if Shin had reached the 5th circle yet. Come to think of it, the guy used a second circle spell in battle, and their Lord of the Blue Magic Tower believes that he uses memorization. That is, since he used a second circle spell, it turns out that Shin is at least a 5th circle mage. It was no surprise that Kanun came with questions, but Shin replied that no, he had not reached the 5th circle. Kanan replies that he knew, but asks how the boy was able to use the second circle spell then. Shin asked if he said he used a spell modification, would the man believe him? Kanan ponders his words and realizes that he is probably talking about the modification he talked about in the interview. Shin confirms everything, saying that yes, this is another modification. No matter how you look at it, reaching the 5th circle at 18 years old is simply impossible, and it would become a worldwide sensation. And if you have to use the 3rd circle in front of everyone, then everything will become even more difficult. They decide to keep it a secret for now, and the man says that modifications are great, of course, but what does they have to do with second circle magic? Shin said he had improved the memorization itself. Kanan was shocked by these words and asked if it was true. He stood up and laughed, because that meant that this was possible. In his opinion, it was amazing. The man is impressed because who would have thought that the shortcomings of these charms could actually be overcome? Shin suddenly notices the man's red eyes. He looks at them with great fear and cannot move. Kanan smiles and removes her hand from the guy's shoulder. He says that inside him, there really is no mana formation characteristic of the 5th circle. It seems, as he said, the guy did not reach the 5th circle. So he'll go away now and explain everything to the reporters. He says his red eyes will serve as proof. And the boy thanks him and wishes him a safe journey home. He bows to him in farewell, but the man is already leaving. Who would have known that the red eyes of the Tower Lord would be used to confirm his words? The red eyes of the Blue Magic Tower's ruler are able to discern the essence of mana itself with their special eyes. These are the best magic detectors in the world, but the guy apparently passed them since the Tower Lord didn't say anything. Weidner's magical style is a top secret, and he cannot reveal it to the world. In the next match, a couple of days later, Shin Hao won again. As the boy was leaving, Adela stopped him. Shin said he thought she would be unconscious for another 4 hours, but he was surprised she was already on her feet. He asked what she wanted, and the girl said that if he didn't mind, she would like to discuss the recent fight in detail. But she noted that it would be better not to do this now, because the final was still ahead, and if he was tired, then it could be done later. Shin replied that everything was fine and they could discuss it now. He could use some analysis of the fights, and they went together to the waiting room. There is a lot to learn from analyzing this match and using strategy in it. Adela thought that she wanted to be like him someday. At this time, the girl in her room was looking at the huge screen on which Shin Hao was. She immediately recognized him and thought that everything was already over with him. She was in the subsidiary office of the Magic Tower and was angry. The girl told her older brother that she thought the outcome of the battle was already decided. She asked him if this Hyul would really get away with everything, since she herself was the eldest daughter of the Shin Si magician's house. Shin Jahan asked her what exactly she wanted him to do. Sia asked what would happen if he returned to the house, since the guy clearly remembered the atmosphere that reigned there just a year ago. She admitted that she could no longer bear such treatment, and her brother calmed her down and asked her not to worry. He said that maybe a year ago Hyul was considered a genius, but now he could barely handle the second circle of magic, and in a fight, that was nothing. He asked his sister if she had seen his matches yet, but the girl reminded that there was a lot of hype around him again. Jihan put his arm around his sister's shoulder and told her to listen carefully. His opponents at the tournament were the most ordinary students, and the two who reached the third round, and even in a fight with a fourth-round newcomer, the guy could easily cope. However, Hyul has a critical flaw. He is not suitable for interactive magic, and even if he found a way to compensate for this or used ancient magical techniques, his level is still inferior to the average fourth circle mage. C realized that this was exactly what she had been thinking. No matter how hard the guy tried, all he could do was flounder in the mud. She began to nervously bite her nail, saying what would happen if Hyul somehow began to threaten her position as the family heir. Jihan used magic to break the mug in his hands and said that then they would deal with him. Evening came, and everyone gathered in the arena again. Suddenly, the losing guy fell to the ground with a loud thud. The referee blew his whistle, raised his hand, and announced that the match was over. Shin Hyul became the winner of the midterm examination competition. All the spectators rejoiced and shouted that this day had finally come. They said it was cool and that the magician's house was the best. They acknowledged that artificial intelligence could only be surpassed in ancient magic, and Hyul was truly a genius. Ji Su-chan ran towards the guy, loudly declaring that Hyul really was the best. He took him by the shoulders and said that now everyone would recognize his skills. But others present, watching the guy, said that without his ancient tricks, he was nothing. Professor approached Hyul and congratulated him, saying that as his class teacher, he was proud of him. Ji suggested throwing a small party to celebrate the student's achievement, and the teacher replied that he didn't need to say anything since he wanted to reward the boy himself. A large crowd had gathered around Hyul because Su-chan was shouting that everyone should get together and go celebrate. Hyul interrupted him and said that he would like to go, but he had one very important meeting. Ji was very surprised because how would they celebrate the holiday without the hero of the occasion? Shin Hyul waved goodbye to him, apologized, and said that it was really important. He ran away, apologizing again, and the professor encouraged the guy by patting him on the shoulder. For Hyul, this meeting was too important to miss. The guy went outside and ran up to the car, next to which stood a man who said he was waiting for him. The man opened the door for him and said that the head of the family was waiting for him, and he would escort the guy to the mansion. Together, closer to night, they reached a huge and beautiful building. Shin Hyul stood in front of the main doors and thought that a whole year had already passed. Then he was declared a scumbag and he rebelled against his heartless father. He entered the academy and lived in a dormitory all this time because he was forbidden to enter the family mansion. Now he entered the main corridor and realized that nothing had changed here. His gaze fell on the other doors, behind which was his father's office. He remembered In-hyuk's eyes, burning with contempt and hatred. Shin Hyul has finally returned after a long absence. After waiting for a few seconds, he knocked on the door 3 times. Behind the door, a man in a black suit sat at a table, looking at documents, and told the guy to come in. The door creaked, and Hyul saw a familiar room. The guy bowed and noted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The father, still indifferently, told the boy to sit down. When his son sat down in front of him, he said that he had already come to terms with his failure. His speed of manifestation was extremely slow, and the formula would dissipate as soon as he lost concentration. What can we say about the combinations of spells if he only proved himself to be incompetent and turned out to be an unsuitable candidate? But everyone recognized his outstanding talent, so his father wanted to direct him in a scientific direction. Of course, this time, he didn't expect anything and thought it was just a cry of despair from a worthless loser. Shin Hyul replied that he understood everything. The father said that when he saw the article, he decided that it was a good opportunity and that, faced with humiliation and another defeat, the boy would come to his senses. But his son completely destroyed his expectations and was able to overcome the lack of incompatibility. Moreover, he managed to go further and created his own unique modification of magic. The man smiled broadly and admitted that Hyul was definitely the winner in this round. His prowess and skill in battle are well worthy of the title of a true and respected wizard. The boy, without hiding his emotions, jumped up from his chair and happily thanked his father. The man firmly stated that from now on, their entire family would fully support him. The son can ask for whatever he needs for his studies, and all restrictions associated with the Shin mansion are lifted. As a rightful heir, the boy must use his powers for the glory of their family. Hyul's eyes lit up. A genuine smile appeared on his face, and he was truly happy. In Hyuk said there was one last warning. If the guy starts to slip again or stays in one place for a long time, then the man will personally destroy his magic circle. As expected from father, this pressure from an 8th circle sorcerer was truly terrifying, but this was his last chance, and so he agreed to this condition. In-hyuk replied that it was great and asked his son what his goal was. In the past, he seemed to want to lead the Shin family. Jihan, Seiya, Min-hyuk, and Minji were still leaving the guy far behind their brothers and sisters. The guy replied that, as he said, he was not giving up his position as head of the family, and this was his final decision. First, he would force everyone here to acknowledge him, and his father asked how he would do that. Hyul put a piece of paper with writing on the table and said that the World Magic Olympiad would take place in 2 months. The most outstanding personalities from all over the world will gather and take part in it, and Hyul will bring her father a gold medal. The Magic Olympiad, open only to students under 20, is held annually and is a dream arena for those who want to capture the world's attention. It is famous for its level, which is not inferior to competitions of adult wizards. Fathers said that at their level, the most outstanding result among the 100 countries was the silver medal that the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower had once won. Hyul understood how impossible his promise of a gold medal was to fulfill, since this was a World Olympics. But his father still asked. The guy replied that yes, so he would have a request. For 2 months, until the competition begins, he asks that his brothers and sisters not interfere with him. The desperate guy used a gold medal he might never get as a means to gain immediate protection. In-hyuk would have refused under any other circumstances, but he smiled and said that it sounded tempting. The next day came, and the sky was clear and the birds were singing. Hyul was lying on the floor with mountains of books around him, and he was sleeping. But as soon as the morning rays of the sun entered the window, he woke up. As soon as he returned from the family mansion, he began searching for the next challenge. Although the guy had only just completed the conditions for the second round, he was already impatient to move on to the third. And to do this, he needed to pass the second test. But he didn't have a single clue, because the book turned out to be empty. The only hope was resonance. If he can upgrade it to the level of a second magic circle master, to reach the second test, the guy will pour mana into it, causing it to flow according to the principles of resonance. Hyul had already done this with the Heart's Call circle and thought that the resonance circle was somehow connected to it. He began to cast a spell, creating 2 loops, one red and one blue, that intertwined, hoping it would work. The loops lit up, flew up to the book, and stuck to it. But nothing happened, and he decided that a short walk would help clear his thoughts. So he went outside. He enjoyed the fresh air and realized that sometimes it was enough for clear thinking. After a walk and breakfast, he decided to delve deeper into the secret of resonance. But suddenly, someone from behind shouted at him to watch out. Hyul turned around in surprise, and some object flew past him. Before he had time to come to his senses and do something, a package flew into his face. A girl ran up to the guy and asked if he was okay, and the guy replied that he was in pain. He removed his hand from his face and realized it was Adela. They were walking down the street together, and the guy asked how it happened that a plastic bag was thrown at him. Adela explained that she was giddy with anticipation of drinking the banana milk, and the bag simply slipped out of her hands. The guy said that he understood everything, and she began to apologize and bow. Hyul said that it was okay, because at least he got free banana milk. He asked her if she really drank only it, and the girl replied that of course she did, because it was the best invention of mankind. They drank milk together, and the girl said that she heard that Hyul had gone home. The guy confirmed that yes, yesterday he was officially given back all his rights as the family heir. Adela smiled and asked if he was happy, and if that meant he still dreamed of becoming the head of the family. Shin was surprised and asked if he had really said that before. The girl remembered her childhood and said that yes, he often mentioned it. Hyul replied that no, it was no longer his dream. Adela wondered if he had finally accepted reality. She added that there are many other worthy candidates in the House of Magicians, and becoming the head is not easy. Hyul didn't understand why she was saying that, because his dream wasn't just to get the House of Magicians. He also wants to become the head of the Magic Tower, or even worse, he wants to conquer the top of the entire magical world, and this is his goal. Adela, thinking about this, replied that it was some kind of unattainable goal, especially for someone who has gone through a path like his, because it is clearly not an easy one. At this time, in the family mansion of the magician's house, C was nervously biting her nails. She asked her older brother what was wrong with him and whether he wasn't worried at all. The boy replied that he was sure his father had his reasons, but he himself cannot believe that his father set such conditions. Recently, they both came into his office and asked why the man had called them. In-hyuk said that he knew them well, so he would have to give the guys a direct order. For the next few months, they must not even think about touching Hyul. C was furious and tried to say something, but her brother stopped her. She asked her father whether he was saying this for a reason or not. In-hyuk replied that he was sure they knew. Hyul had been officially accepted back into the House of Magicians. His value is small, because the guy has not participated in family affairs for a whole year. It might take him a couple of months to adjust again. And not just two of them might want to stop him, exerting some pressure so that the guy doesn't encroach on the position of head of the family. Jihan smiled and said that he understood everything and asked if anything else was needed. The father replied that no, they were probably tired and should go and rest. C asked her older brother why he didn't even argue, but the guy's face was distorted with anger, and he said that it still wouldn't have changed anything. Minhyuk and Minji are not interested in competing for the position of head of the family. Jihan could understand why they weren't invited, and asked if his father really wanted them to leave Hyul alone just because he missed a year. Surely his father told the boy to somehow make up for lost time, since Hyul is aiming for the place of heir, because such protection is provided only the younger children under 16 who have received their artificial intelligence chips. Hyul was already 17, which meant he didn't fit into that category, and Jihan wondered why his father had demanded such a thing. Sia whispered that this couldn't be, but assumed that her father had already chosen the head. Jihan replied that definitely not, because Hyul had demonstrated too little for his father to decide so. It seems like In-hyuk sees potential in him again. Perhaps he was simply curious about this unusual magic that Hyul had developed, or perhaps the boy had forced his father to promise something in return. Sia was surprised that he really thought there was a deal, and asked what her brother could promise. Under normal circumstances, her father would never have done this, and she simply doesn't have enough anger towards her brother. It seems she would have to call off all the people she had sent to spy on Hyul, and Jihan replied that she would, unless they wanted their shadows gutted. The shadows are the father's personal spies, a secret organization working for the family, and these people are good at everything from infiltration and espionage to protection. The elder brother remembered that, by the way, he had already recalled his observer. C asked what he intended to do next. The guy explained that he would go first, and the girl rarely takes direct part in anything, but he himself did not like the idea of being inactive for 2 months. If Hyul did make a deal with his father, it could be dangerous, and he needs help from the Black Magic Tower. At the academy, the professor said that everyone had successfully passed the midterm exams and praised everyone. She asked for applause, because he was very proud that a student from their class took first place. It was Shin Hyul, and upon hearing his name, the boy stood up and everyone began to whisper. The professor congratulated him, saying that it was safe to say that he was the best in the country among his peers. And since the guy is in first place, why not try to keep him for the next few months to take part in the World Olympics? Hyul replied that this is exactly what he will strive for. And his classmates whispered that they didn't believe what he said and considered their success to be some kind of trick. But he was already pretending to be someone unknown. They laughed, saying that 2 months will be enough for him, and advise him to keep his pockets open since he's leaving in a week. Everyone thinks he's definitely going to lose his grip soon. Ji Sushan stood after class, stretching, glad that it was all over. 8 theoretical pairs are difficult, but Hyul replied that from tomorrow onwards, there will only be practice. It will be no less difficult, but physical activity certainly won't hurt him. He said that Ji was clearly out of shape. Suchan didn't understand how that was possible because he would definitely beat the guy in magic. And now he's not weak in magic either. Hyul, leaving, said that if a guy doesn't like something, he should just work on his weaknesses. Ji jokingly said that he would pump up and hit the guy on the head. Hyul didn't believe it and suggested that maybe he could take some food to the gem and they could work out there. Ji made a dissatisfied face, and the guy asked what was wrong with him. And the blonde replied that it wasn't that he didn't want to, it's just that he wasn't feeling very well today. Hyul tensed up and said that his friend should tell everything as it is, and if not, then not. Ji said he would be honest. He hates training, and simply doesn't like training with Hyul, because frankly speaking, the guy really scares him. And in fact, everyone thinks so. Here is Hyul, already in the training hall of the Obelisk Academy, in sportswear, all sweaty, squatting with a very heavy barbell. And he can't understand what's wrong with Suchan, because he just wanted to remind him about the importance of training. Everyone watched the guy, not understanding who he was, and wondered how a person could lift such a weight. And then they found out that he was a second-year champion. Hyul put the barbell down and thought that he had been so focused on learning Wheatnear's magical style that he had completely neglected physical exercise. He drinks his cocktail from a straw and thinks that this was also said in Adred. Since the infinity circle circulates throughout the body, Physical exercise can improve it. A healthy body has a healthy circle, and they are interconnected. If a guy trains both magic and physical fitness, he will have the body of his dreams. Hyul headed to the training room where he was surrounded by 3 panthers. They had 3 eyes that sparkled, sharp claws and 2 tails. When they attacked, the guy jumped aside. Then he used his magic, and beams of water passed through one of the panthers. When the other 2 attacked him, he ducked and they collided heads. After that, the guy used the flame volcano magic, and a fireball appeared in his hand. A couple of seconds later, he flew into one of the panthers, and it disappeared. Before the 3rd panther could attack, it also disappeared. They announced to Hyulu that the practical training with monsters was completed. The professor sat nearby, looking at the tablet and looking for the results. He declared it a perfect score, and the boy thanked him. After that, he sat down in the corridor where there were several people and looked at his hand. Thanks to the infinity circles, his physical capabilities increased by at least 1.5 times. Once he reaches the 3rd circle, it will be even better. So he wants to strengthen the circle of infinity as much as he can. Hyul tried to concentrate. Magic hovered around him, a circle of resonance, and 2 streams of mana spread throughout his body. Now we need to reduce vibration and flow deviation by 12.25% and 4.63% respectively. Align the flow of the circle of the call of the heart by 8.9%. The guy tried a little more, but immediately got tired and stopped. The synchronization was 99%, and in the end, that 1% is not achieved, no matter how hard you try. But the guy is obliged to bring the 2nd circle to perfection, and he will definitely succeed. Hyul put on his headphones in the evening and went for a run down the street. Suddenly, as he turned the corner, an unknown figure met him and tried to hit him. Hyul reacted instantly, and despite being very surprised, he dodged. He stood next to the stranger and asked who he was. When the moonlight fell on the stranger's face, the boy immediately recognized it as Baek Sa-hyuk. But the guy tried to strike again, and Hyul dodged. Baek Sa-hyuk took off her mask and said that he was wriggling like a rat. Hyul, like a professional, picked up the earphone he had dropped and asked what was wrong, since it was the weekend and shouldn't he have gone home? Hyul smiled and sarcastically asked if it was not that Sa-hyuk didn't want to go, but that he couldn't. It was probably because the guy was on probation and Sa-hyuk told him to shut up. Hyul laughed, because the guy used to intimidate everyone with his father, but now he is afraid of him himself, or because of his failure, does not want to show his face to his family. The guy started laughing at his interlocutor, and he couldn't stand it. Started casting a spell and ordered him to shut up. Hyul was shocked that the guy was going to perform magic on the street just because of a couple of harsh words. But Sa-hyuk could no longer be stopped. He was angry and ran towards the enemy. However, the guy turned out to be more dexterous and stopped Sa-hyuk by the hood and by the hand. He didn't have time to react because Hyul turned him face down. Hyul sat on it, considering this situation a good opportunity for himself. The police arrived and detained Sa-hyuk, who was screaming to be let go because he had to teach the boy some manners, but they told him to calm down and come with them to talk later. Hyul explained to the man that he was forced to somehow subdue him because he tried to attack him with combat magic. The CCTV camera must have recorded it. He couldn't believe that Sa-hyuk would dare to perform magic in a public place. The man said that they would announce the details tomorrow at the academy, but now it was late, and it was better to return to his room. People tried to push the guy into the car, but he resisted. Hyul thought that it would be nice if Baek Sa-hyuk continued in the same spirit. The next day, almost all the students gathered around the news board where it was written that Sa-hyuk was caught using combat magic on the street. But he received a 10-point penalty, and everyone was surprised why it was so low, since that would usually result in a suspension from classes. Hyul thought the 10-point penalty was not surprising. The Baek family was influential and at one time donated a significant amount to the academy. Therefore, they could count on special treatment, and the academy would hardly risk severely punishing their son. He will probably hear enough moralizing to last him the rest of his life. Baek Sa-hyuk was talking on the phone with his father near the academy, and his father was calling him names. The boy apologized, and his father shouted that he had asked him to keep a low profile until graduation. The man complained and asked if it was really that hard. He said that if the family didn't get the title because of him, he would be held responsible. Sa-hyuk replied that he understood, and his father hung up. The guy got really angry and threw the phone at one of the columns. His eyes were burning. Veins stood out on his face, and he blamed Shin Hyul for everything. He stomped on the phone and called the guy an obnoxious scumbag. Suddenly, the teacher came up to him and said that the boys seemed to be full of envy. Baek Sahyuk realized that it was Instructor Smith and asked if he couldn't do that. The man replied that one can love or hate because it is a person's right to choose. But he asked if the guy was really looking for revenge. He said that he must take revenge on Shin Hyul. Hyul sat at the table in his room at night. He thought that Sayoku had probably already been reprimanded, and this would only play into his hands. The boy looked at his phone and saw that he had received a message from his father. The man wrote that the agreement with the Beck family was made in exchange for them turning a blind eye to the incident while receiving 3% of the income from their magic stone mines. He called his son a good boy and wrote that if he needed something, he just had to say so. In order for the Beck family to receive an official title, they needed good relations not only with the academy, but also with other influential families. Therefore, they were forced to take extreme measures, because the victim of the incident was Hyul. But he was not a simple man, but the direct heir to a house of magicians, so the Beck family wanted to hush up this issue at any cost. And 3% of the income from their magic stone mines was a very valuable asset, showing how important an official title was for any clan. The title was a sign of prestige. For example, the Divine Guardian clan had the title of Mythical, and the Wei clan had the title of Mysterious, and the title made the clan outstanding. In fact, Baek Sahyuk was now the family's scholar, and with his level of skill, he posed no threat to the boy. Hyul decided it was time to stop playing Santa Claus and handing out gifts and get back to working on resonance. And the next day, he came to the academy. The academy appeared to have stepped up security measures following the recent incident. Suddenly, Instructor Smith came up to him and called him. At first, when Hyul turned around, the man just looked at him strangely and remained silent. He said that he had noticed long ago that perhaps Hyul did not like him. It was understandable because the man was strict, but all his words were spoken for his own good, and the guy should not misunderstand him. He asked if they should start over and extended his hand. Hyul said it wasn't worth it, but thanked him for the offer. Suddenly, a dark aura enveloped him, and he felt sick. He did not understand what this strange feeling was. Smith said that, although belatedly, he congratulated the guy on first place in the midterms, sincerely wished him further success, and Hyul realized that he was definitely oozing mana. Hyul couldn't understand if she was really that dark and sinister. Is this man really a representative of the Black Magic Tower? The Black Magic Tower is an unofficial organization, different from the officially recognized dozen. It is a group of criminals with impure intentions, led by a magician who calls himself the King of Black Magic. Hyul was completely shocked by the thought that his instructor could be connected to this man. This meant that there could well be other minions of the Black Tower within the walls of the academy, but it was unknown since when. Pushing all these thoughts aside, he realized that it didn't matter now, and decided to first understand the structure of his spell in order to assess the situation. Hyul saw the formula for these spells in front of him, examined it, and realized that it was familiar to him, because it was mind control magic. However, his brain was immune to the effects of the mana's will. This means that Instructor Smith's mind control simply won't work on him. Hyul was glad that he was so lucky. The teacher didn't understand anything yet, and so it was better for him to pretend that the control was working. Then, Hyul would be able to figure out what exactly the Black Tower needed. Smith removed his hand from the boy and was glad that the magic had worked. The dragons were the ones who couldn't use AI chips, and who would have thought that a man would stoop to apologizing to him? He brought his face close to Hyul and ordered him to listen carefully. He then gave him a chip and told him that from now on he should always carry it with him and never ask why he needed it. After which, he ended the conversation. Hyul agreed with a glassy gaze. After this, the man demanded that the boy tell all the details about his modification of magic. Hyul understood that he could not reveal this in any way and began to feign pain. He held his head, trembled, and the man decided that his subconscious was desperately protecting the secret of his unique magic. Seeing this, he canceled his request. Mind control magic, which targets an opponent's brain, is a spell that can subjugate a person. It is a signature skill for Black Tower mages, and if used by a high-level mage, can even destroy the human brain. This makes it incredibly dangerous, and also places it on the forbidden list, and, as Hyul showed, a person can resist the control to a certain extent. If a topic of particular importance to him is touched upon, an attempt to strengthen control could lead to the destruction of the mind. And since the man gave in so easily, it means that Hyul's modified magic is not their ultimate goal. Smith complained that the boy's magic was irrelevant to their boss's plan. He himself would gladly sell its secrets, but he could not fail the mission for the sake of fleeting desires. Snapping his fingers, he declared that then they would just wait until the end of the mission and he would still get the information he needed. Kayul suddenly came to his senses and was surprised, and the man asked if he was okay. He seemed to have withdrawn into himself during the conversation and was apparently very tired, so they decided not to disturb him and let him go. Kayul agreed with the teacher and said goodbye to him. Smith turned and walked away, soon disappearing into the crowd. Behind his back, Hayul looked at him angrily. He walked past students who were discussing what they wanted to eat, suggesting going to the cafeteria and reminiscing about yesterday's classes. Hayul sat down on a bench near the academy and looked at the chip in his hand. He realized that these were illegal artificial intelligence chips called EU chip. It was obvious that they wanted to frame him by making him appear to be a user of a banned artificial intelligence. In this way, they tried to drag his reputation into the mud, calling his smile true hypocrisy. Instructor Smith himself had little reason to go so far, since their relationship, although strained, did not require such measures. So there must be someone who ordered this from the Black Magic Tower. This would explain a lot, because for someone constrained by thoughts and limitations, such a thing is hardly possible. Therefore, there is a high probability that one of his brothers or sisters was behind this. They wanted to damage his reputation in order to finally eliminate him in the race for the place of the head of the family. Minji had never been particularly active in power struggles and had no motive to organize such a thing. Minhyuk was interested in the leader's position, but he wasn't low enough to plan it. The guy most suspected the remaining two, who might have been acting together. He thought he could confront the instructor and find out everything directly. But he decided it was too risky, since the Black Tower would not forgive information leaks. Moreover, the instructor might not have known the identity of the client, and then he would have become a scapegoat. In this case, the guy would only have attracted unnecessary attention from the Black Tower, which is extremely disadvantageous in the current conditions. After some time, Hayul came to another building and took the elevator up. Approaching the right room, he met Kim Kan-eun. He turned to the guest and asked why exactly the guy wanted to see him. Hayul remembered that this man was the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower, and his greeting today was colder than usual. But Hayul had no other choice. Kang-gun says he's a bit busy right now, so this is the perfect time. But Hayul decides not to back down, because another chance might not present itself. Perhaps the man is busy with something, which is why he's been on edge lately. The guy asked if he had interrupted his research, and he said yes, because he was studying an unusual mana stone. It took longer than he expected, and Shin looked away in surprise. On the table, on the pillow, lay an elemental stone. Hayul immediately realized that this was a good opportunity. They sat down together, and Kanan told the guy to get down to business quickly. He asked what was so important he wanted to communicate that he insisted on an immediate meeting and definitely face-to-face. It seemed to Kayul that the man was extremely irritated, and no matter what he said now, he was unlikely to agree to cooperate. He decided that they needed to come to some kind of agreement and said that before they got down to business, he would like to share his knowledge. The conversation was about the stone that the man was examining, the elemental stone. Kanan was very surprised. Did he really know anything about these stones, since their name had not even been officially revealed yet? Hayul had to choose his words very carefully, and the boy said that he had in no way been spying on the Blue Magic Tower. Kanan asked how he knew about it then, and the guy replied that it was simple. He took a stone out of his bag and said in a reserved tone that he had one of those very rare specimens. Kanan jumped up from the sofa abruptly, his face expressing genuine surprise and even slight disbelief. Hayul calmly explained that it was a perfectly tuned elemental stone of the highest quality. Kanan, still in shock, asked if he could really have built this stone himself, completely and personally. Kayul confirmed without hesitation that yes, it was he who created it with his own hands. The man couldn't believe that he could do this and thought that he must be joking. James Pillar, the famous master of magical engineering from the Red Magic Tower, and the elite engineers from the Blue Magic Tower, who had been working with magical stones for many years, were unable to figure them out. Even Kanan himself, who is called the world's expert on magic stones, was unable to organize the flows of mana. And now they tell him that an ordinary student was able to cope with this. Kanan didn't believe it and asked if the guy was just lucky enough to set it up. The guy replied that yes, he believed that only the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower could help deal with such material, so he brought it with him. Kanan asked if Hayul wouldn't explain how exactly he had set it up. The guy said that he himself doesn't know it. It just happened naturally. and that's all he can say for now. Kanan replied that it meant that he got it by chance, set it up by chance, and was simply a lucky guy. But he added that any magician has the right to his secrets. He didn't interrogate further, and Hyul thanked him for that. Kanan asked to take a closer look at the stone and realized it was a perfectly attuned mana stone that supported all 4 elements simultaneously. Kanan returned it back and asked if he had brought it to create an artifact. Hyul agreed and admitted that he brought it precisely for this purpose. The man asked what kind of artifact he wanted, an item of clothing, jewelry, or perhaps a weapon. Hyul said that as long as the stone could enhance the effectiveness of elemental magic, anything would do. The man replied that he understood, but stones of such high quality require other high-quality materials. It could be expensive, and he asked the guy if he was ready for it. Kanan immediately apologized, because in front of him sat a direct descendant of the House of Magicians, and he would present the bill to his father. Hyul said that there was no need for this, as he did not want his family to know about this artifact. Kanan called him a sly man and asked how he was going to pay then, since the amount would be huge. He asked if he could pay for it out of his own pocket. Hyul replied that no, but he had something in return, and another way of payment. He offered to attune all the elemental stones for them if they wanted, and to do it right in their presence. Kanan asked if the guy really meant to say that he was ready to reveal the tuning method to him. He laughed because it sounded tempting, and said that it was more than enough to pay, and frankly, they would even end up in debt. Hyul asked if he could then ask for one favor. The man asked what specific service he wanted and whether it was related to the agenda. The guy took an object out of his bag and handed it to the man. Kanan took it and realized that it was an EU chip, a banned artificial intelligence, and wondered where the guy got it. Hyul clasped his hands and said that there was a mage from the Black Magic Tower in the academy, and he handed this to him. He assumed that a criminal group was operating in the Obelisk Academy and asked for help getting rid of them. Already at night, the car took Hyul to the place designated for him. He leaned over and thanked the girl behind the wheel, wishing her a safe journey. Kanan's assistant nodded, said that they would meet next time, and left. After taking a shower, Hyul lay down tiredly on his bed. He was lucky, because who would have known that Kim Kanun was researching elemental stones? Thanks to this, the boy will receive an artifact that even his father will not know about. In fact, he had wanted to use the 3% of shares he had received from the Beck family as a bribe in the negotiations. But now he had managed to save them. It was very good, and the guy began to close his eyes. He hoped that everything would work out. Earlier, Kanan, sitting in his office, could not believe that the Black Tower mages had gotten so close. They settled inside the Obelisk Academy, famous for its security system. The only evidence was an illegal AI chip, and the guy asked if that was too much to ask. The man smiled and said that under any other circumstances, the Blue Tower would not have taken seriously the testimony of a student with a tiny piece of evidence. But he agreed and decided to take a risk and start investigating this case. Hyul walked down the corridor and talked to a man who asked if he was there, to which the guy answered in the affirmative, and everything went according to plan on his subscriber. Hyul entered the elevator and was told not to worry. After all, if the information is correct, the Blue Magic Tower will not make mistakes. The guy was already riding in the elevator, saying that he understood everything, trusted the man, and they decided to call each other later. Hyul was greeted by a servant, and the guy walked along the red carpet. He said that here he was and greeted his brothers and sisters. Shin Minji, the second daughter of the House of Magicians, was overjoyed, as she hadn't seen Hyul for a long time. The guy replied that yes, and the girl hadn't changed at all, and she asked if it was really a compliment, and he confirmed it. Minji noticed that the boy had grown up and might soon outgrow Min-hyuk. The second son of the House of Magicians, Shin Min-hyuk, told the girl to stop, laughed, and added that she would crow. He put his hand on the guy's shoulder and said welcome, admitting that it was a bit silly to be happy about it, but he was genuinely glad to see him. Hyul thanked his brother and thought that he was as honest as always. Minji began to scold her brother for constantly speaking without thinking, and the man did not understand what he said wrong. Hyul turned to his other relatives and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Jihan and Si were sitting at the table. The first son of the House of Magicians, Shin Jihan, noted that his brother had matured and his face was no longer so childish. The first daughter of the House of Magicians, Shin Xia, called the guy her youngest and also said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. On the outside, she was all smiles, but in reality, she was ready to eat Hyul alive, and he was sure that there was a villain among them, as he thought. Jihan raised his glass, invited everyone to sit down, and said that they should talk over food. He wondered why the younger one had gathered them all here. Hyul replied that there was no special reason. He just wanted to see his brothers and sisters again after a long separation. Sia was surprised that he actually called them for just that reason, even though they were damn busy. Hyul said he was sure that even if he hadn't scheduled the meeting, Sia and Jihan would have done so anyway. Si got angry, got up from the table, and asked how he could talk to his elders like that. She added that they needed to have a frank talk and find out what he was planning. Hyul didn't understand what she was talking about, and the girl told him not to play the fool, because he was going to fight for the place of head of the family. Hyul asked what would happen if he said he wasn't going to, and whether his sister would believe him. Si replied that of course she wouldn't believe it, so why all these questions? Jihan told his sister that she shouldn't have asked about it, because actions speak louder than words. He then asked his brother if he had invented a new magic and offered to share the details of the modified magic. Hyul decided that this was a good move, and the request to share knowledge was a kind of test to see if he was a candidate for the position of head of the family, but they would not be able to drive him into a dead end. He pretended to be a sweet boy and said that it was a secret and his only hope. He shed a small tear, because as a human incompatible with artificial intelligence, he couldn't just sever his lifeline for everyone, and the competition had nothing to do with it. Minji also shed tears and said that in that case, nothing could be done, because this was her brother's only hope. She wiped away his tears, and the boy thanked her for her understanding. Minhyuk laughed, raised his glass, and said that talking about competition was pointless, and it would be better if his brother told him how he had lived all this time. Minji agreed and added that she also wanted to hear her brother's story. At this time, Jihan and Si were talking to each other. Minji, Minhyuk, and Hyul were happily chatting with each other. Hyul glanced at his watch and realized that enough time had passed. Suddenly, everyone received a message on their phones from a stranger. Nobody understood what this message was and what kind of emergency had occurred. Si was surprised that this happened now, at such a time. An emergency contact in the breaking news reported that a connection had been confirmed between someone from the Obelisk Academy faculty and the Black Magic Tower. The second son of the famous Smith family from France, Lang Smith, was arrested, and this was confirmed by Kim Kanun's secretary from the Blue Magic Tower. Hyul immediately noticed the face of his older brother, who was already putting the phone away. He realized that this was exactly how his brother got caught. He remembered the look on his face when he deleted the message and wondered if he had done it himself. Hyul sat on the streets, and they told him through his earphone that everything happened just as he predicted. He had read news reports that Smith had changed the settings on the survival test equipment, and if the girl hadn't happened to look in, the scale of the disaster at the test scheduled for Friday could only be imagined. Kanan asked how Hyul knew that Lang Smith would interfere with the test preparations. Hyul replied that it was a logical conclusion based on the information received. Considering that Lang Smith infiltrated the academy, he probably did so for a specific purpose. Also, considering the time period for which the mind control magic was cast. And the easiest way to sabotage the survival test date, scheduled for Friday, was by damaging the equipment. Typically, all equipment is checked one day before the exams, so the ideal moment to break in was immediately after the check. And just today, on Thursday night, Jan Su came into the room. Hyul asked the people from the Blue Magic Tower to monitor the equipment room while he was at a meeting with his brothers and sisters. Around this time, the representative of the Black Magic Tower should have been caught. In the end, Instructor Smith was indeed caught. Hyul also found out that it was Jihan who maintained contact with the Black Tower. By making sure that no one would know about his involvement, the guy got the information he needed with minimal risk, and it was a flawless operation. The only downside was that he only received circumstantial evidence confirming the connection between his brother and Instructor Smith, but he was unable to obtain anything substantial. Kanan said he tried to help, but in the end, it was Hyul who helped them, and the reputation of the Blue Magic Tower skyrocketed because they were the ones who dealt with the situation. He added that he would repay the guy someday, and he replied that he would not refuse. Kanun admitted that he liked his sincerity, but he had to go, so he hung up. Hyul thanked him for his work and decided that was the end of it. But suddenly a huge explosion thundered behind the guy. He was thrown to the side, fell, and did not understand what was happening. A figure emerged from the cloud of smoke and called out Hyul's name several times. It was Baek Sa-hyuk, whose eyes were burning with madness, and he, as if he had lost his mind, wanted to take the guy's life at any cost. Hyul stood frozen in complete shock, unable to believe his eyes, when this ruthless and dangerous opponent appeared before him. Without thinking or realizing the consequences, Baek Sa-hyuk threw a blazing fireball towards the boy. Hyul was amazed at the incredible speed with which his opponent was now able to cast complex spells. Almost instinctively, he used resonance magic, creating a shimmering water shield in front of him. But Sayuk's attack was too powerful, and it was clear that the water shield would not be able to withstand such a strong blow. Holding one hand with the other, he used a static water shield. After this, unable to bear it any longer, he jumped to the side. The fireball touched the ground and burst into a huge explosion. Hayul looked at his hand and realized that he had not been able to completely avoid damage. It was wounded. Sahyuk laughed and told the boy to feel the difference in skills between them. He called him a defective piece of trash and asked if he was showing off. Hayul looked at the youth and couldn't understand what was wrong with him, because his eyes were bloodshot. Even the skin turned red and saliva came out of the mouth. It was a reaction as if he had taken the illegal drug Berserker. This drug forcibly accelerates the magic circle, but at the same time, blood vessels begin to burst. And it was named so because the user looks like a real Berserker. But the worst thing is that the person will be ready to fight until he falls dead. Hayul thought that the scarlet flashes of mana were the third circle spell, Flame Infection. The guy didn't have time to come to his senses before Sahyuk was already standing in front of him and grabbed his hands. Hayul tried to fight back and called him a crazy psycho, and the guy replied that he was completely fine and that everything had finally fallen into place. His eyes were shining like a madman. He laughed and said that Hayul was going to die now. After that, he placed his hand on the guy's chest and used Flame Infection. Hayul couldn't withstand the blow and fell, and Sayuk stood over him and laughed. But when Sayuk saw that he was alive, he was very surprised. He covered his face with his hands and realized that the guy had blocked his magic twice. But he didn't understand how he could do it, since he was defective, and how he dared. He asked the same question several times and then shouted. Suddenly his mood changed. He became calm and thought that this was, probably true. Hayul stood up and realized that everything was as he expected. The guy was in a state of emotional instability, which is definitely a berserker. But something still didn't add up. The power of that magic was such that no matter how much berserker a person took, it was impossible to increase his magical power that much. Hayul thought that perhaps it was worth testing this and decided to bewitch the wind. He used the air spear spell, and several birds made of wind appeared around him. At first, Sayuk looked at them calmly, not understanding what was happening. And then he asked what kind of magic it was, his eyes filled with anger, and he used fire magic. Hayul said that he was certainly a good man for dodging the spear, but he noted that he found himself with magic near his feet, and said that the guy needed to be more careful. And now, before Sayuk could react, the boy used Airstrike. Just a couple of seconds later, Hayul was glad that he had hit the target. But Sayuk started using Fire Strike even at this distance. It was the magic fire shot, and it was about to reach Hayul's face. Sayuk held his hands out like a gun, shot fire, and told the boy to die. The fire pellet is known for being much more powerful at close range, but its range is only 7.74 meters. Hayul decided that if he jumped, he might be able to dodge. Fireballs were flying around him from all sides, but he dodged. Hayul asked the guy if he really hated him so much that he even implanted himself with an illegal EU. Sayuk laughed like crazy and didn't understand what chip he was talking about and what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Hayul realized that the boy seemed to remember nothing and realized it. Sayuk said he didn't need tricks to defeat trash like him. He ordered them to stop talking nonsense and humbly accept their fate. Hayul said that the EU chip is capable of strengthening the user's body and adjusting formulas, but it is outlawed because it has too much of an effect on the strength and range of damage. Sayuk continued to scream and didn't understand why he suddenly needed to worry about this. Hayul said it was ironic, since he had recently been studying exactly what had to do with structural changes in mana circles and their influence on magical formulas. Thanks to this, the boy became very sensitive to changes in magic related to the strengthening of mana and the acceleration of circles. I don't know if it can be called luck or not, but he really did have an epiphany thanks to the illegal chip in the Berserker. Hayul put his hand forward and said that he would not thank her, as he was more concerned about whether he could finish this before dawn, after which he used resonance magic. An extra-level chip allows a person to use magic one ring higher than their current level. Over the past few days, the guy has studied a huge amount of information on this topic, including an Adrid. The problem was the penalty. Hayul tried to implement the spell in a similar way, combining the flows of magic circles to speed it up. But this had negative consequences for the mind and body. The time limit before receiving a penalty was 3 minutes, which was too little time for the second circle master. After this, the circle was unable to pump mana for 12 hours. so you had to think 3 times before using something like this. Sahyuk shouted at the boy that he was muttering under his breath and was probably scared, but he replied that he would only have 3 minutes. He thought and decided that this time was enough, sat down on the floor, and used the magic earth needles. The asphalt began to crumble. A huge crack appeared forward, from which many spikes burst out. Sahyuk didn't have time to jump back, and one of the spikes pierced his leg. He immediately realized that this was the magic of the third circle, and he couldn't believe that such a guy could have such power. Kayul just smiled and didn't know how to explain it. Sahyuk got out of the trap and screamed for the boy to die. Hyul noted that he was not only a bad sorcerer, but also used tasteless curses, after which he used a water shield. When fireballs flew at him, Hyul easily stopped them with water magic. Sahyuk laughed, calling the guy an idiot, and assured him that he would parry again like last time. He wished for it to burn to ashes, but immediately a water hurricane appeared. Sahyuk was extremely surprised and did not understand what it was, and the guy suggested that he first think before reasoning. Kayul noted that in his place, he would have immediately understood that the water shield differed in level, just like the earth needles. Now Sahyuk's magic couldn't even touch him. Sahyuk started shaking with anger. His eyes turned red. Drool started flowing from his mouth, and he ran towards the guy. He stated that since he became stronger, it means he must have used more doping, and that it was only because of that he was winning. Kayul declared that it was all over, and the boy should not expect mercy since he had asked for it. He stepped on the asphalt, and the floor surface around him turned into a thin layer of water, and then used darkness blindness magic. Everything around Sahyuk was plunged into darkness. He could hardly see anything and did not understand what was happening. Hyul thought that if the boy had been less obsessed with murder, all of this could have been avoided. Sahyuk began to panic, demanding that the enemies stop running and come out because he was supposed to attack, not hide. At this time, Hyul whispered a spell, combining the earth binding and the air binding. Chains flew from all sides and tied up Sahyuk, who immediately recognized this magic. An unknown liquid rose from the ground, wrapped itself around his legs, and hardened. Hyul said that it was already late, and the last service he would render was to set him on the right path quickly and with maximum comfort. Sahyuk yelled at the guy to stop talking so much because he wasn't done with him yet, and was blaming him for all his problems. Hyul replied that even if it weren't for him, Sahyuk would still have found someone to blame. He recalled that he knew why such chips were outlawed, in addition to their harm to health. Hyul reached up to his neck and touched the chip, sending a short pulse of mana into the overheated mechanism. He asked what it was like, because even under the influence of a berserker, the pain must be unbearable. Sahyuk cried, spat, coughed, and begged to stop. Kayul explained that the overload of artificial intelligence in the body leads to it not being able to withstand even the slightest external influence. He thanked him for his idiotic behavior, because now the Beck family would pay in full again. This time, the stakes were even higher than last time. 30, maybe even 40% of the income from the magic stone mines. The guy said goodbye to Sahyuk and thanked him for his contribution to his money tree. Multicolored loops appeared on his hand, and he placed his palm on the chip. After this, Sahyuk's body was pierced by a sharp pain that he could do nothing about. Now he was lying on the floor with steam coming out of his neck. Hyul picked up his phone from the floor and made a call. He greeted his father, who asked why he was calling at such an hour. Kayul reminded that his father had seen everything and should not pretend. Despite the late hour, the absence of students on the street seemed all too natural, as even the police were nowhere to be seen, although they made quite a lot of noise. The father tried to justify himself by saying that the students could have simply hidden, and that his ability to stop the police did not mean that he did so. Hyul noted that many people could have stopped the police, but only his father would have watched the fight, while anyone else would have intervened or stabbed him in the back. Moreover, thanks to their agreement, the brothers and sisters could not spy on him. In-hyuk laughed and admitted that his son was right, and it really was him. The bushes nearby began to move, and a dark figure emerged from them. Father said that he had assigned Seokhyun to Hyul. The men in black surrounded Sahyuk and began to examine him while Hyul stepped aside. His father asked him why he was calling if he already knew about the surveillance. Kayul admitted that he just wanted to show off his third lap. And Hyuk replied that he didn't remember any significant achievements recently, and asked if he had been hiding the third circle of magic from the very beginning. Hyul confirmed that this was indeed the case, but in reality it was a lie, as he was only using the acceleration of the resonance circle for short-term amplification. He said that he still lacked strength, and if his brothers and sisters found out that he owned the third circle, it would be bad. The pressure from Jihan and Xiao will increase sharply. However, he has one more thing. as Seokhyun used a soundproof barrier and Lucy's magic to isolate them from the surrounding people. Now, he noted that this was not a bad measure and said that he had sent a car and they should return home and spend the night there today. Kayul thanked him and said that they would see each other no later, after which he hung up. Suddenly, a smile appeared on In-hyuk's face, and then he laughed. He thought he didn't know what his son had been doing all last year, but his confidence was impressive. Hayul turned to Seokhyun, noting that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The guy, without wasting any time, took off his mask and said that it was a really long time ago. He apologized and promised to quickly cure him, using magic to heal the small wound on his face. He provided first aid and left the rest to the staff of their family. Hayul thanked him and said that then they needed to deal with the rest of them here. Seokhyun put on a mask and said that this matter was unlikely to go beyond the barrier. Jihan stood, nervously, and straightened his tie. He turned to his interlocutor and asked why everything turned out this way. An unknown man, covering his face and sitting on the sofa, asked the guy if he had just finished work. He already thought that it would last all night, although he liked the sofa, and Jihan realized that this was a man from the Black Tower. The man said yes, but that was not the point now, and expressed surprise that the Blue Tower had intervened and ruined all their plans, as it was difficult to work when people were arrested before the case even started. Jihan, hearing the man's laughter, was furious and asked if there was any reason to laugh in this situation, since the tower promised that everything would work out. He wondered if their promises were worthless, or if they wanted to destroy him. The man apologized, explaining that he often laughed on his own, and said that since the mission had failed, the money would not be returned, and all evidence would be carefully removed. All this is done for the client, so there is no need to worry about information leakage. Lang Smith would never see the light of day again. But Jihan replied that he did not care about his life. He's more concerned about the illegal AI chips he gave to Hayul and Sayuk, along with the Berserker, and he asked how they were going to deal with it. The man replied that the boy shouldn't worry, since Baek Sahyuk was no longer incapacitated. Jihan was surprised and asked what this meant. The man explained that it appeared he had attacked Kayul's dog. Because of this, he is now hardly different from a walking corpse due to the side effects. Jihan said that this nonsense did not bother him and asked what was wrong with Hayul. He replied that he might be slightly injured, but otherwise fine. And Jihan began to get angry, suspecting that the man was simply distracting him. But he stated that he was only stating the facts. Jihan realized that his brother had managed to defeat Sayuk, who was under the influence of Berserk and the chip at the same time. The man smiled and said that everything was correct. But that was not all. When Baek Sahyuk attacked the boy, it was unknown whether he did it to observe or to defend himself. Mr. Seokhyun appeared there and immediately cast a soundproof barrier and illusion magic. The man was unable to watch the fight to the end, but noted that it was exciting. Jihan realized that the shadows were involved and asked the man if he knew, since when Seokhyun had been accompanying his brother. The man said he first noticed it when Jihan and Hayul's paths crossed, but he wasn't sure. Seokhyun works directly for his father, and Jihan asked if the man meant to say that the shadow leader was personally involved, and why someone like him would be assigned such a task. If the shadows were involved, they would have to be extremely careful, and it looked like they would have to give up on trying to get their brother for a while. He asked the man what to do with the chip he had given to Hayul, but he replied that there was no need to worry. The chip has a built-in self-destruct program, so it has most likely already been deactivated and destroyed. He asked if there were any more questions, but received a negative answer. The man walked up to the window and said that he was leaving then, as he had to deal with Lang Smith. He jumped down and said goodbye to his dear client. Jihan watched him go silently and thought that he needed to get rid of all the evidence that could lead Kim Seokhyun to him. It was easy to break through the protective magic of Jihan's house, so it was necessary to hurry. A few days later, Hayul closed the book he had finished reading in his room. He placed it on the table and stretched. Today, the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower informed him that Lang Smith suddenly clutched his heart and died before the ambulance arrived. The guy knew something like this could happen, but he didn't expect them to be so serene. He thought that at least Seokhyun had been able to properly handle the incident with Sahyuk. A sudden message interrupted his thoughts. His father wrote about the need to talk with the Baek family. To settle the matter, he was offered 43% of the profits from their mines, and his father said that with this money, financing the overseas business would no longer be a problem. Hayul smiled when he saw such a long message, and guessed that his father was happy at that moment. He decided that he was glad of the successful outcome, but now he had a much more important event awaiting him. There are 53 days left until the academic Olympiad, and the whole world is watching it closely. Suddenly, a beam of magic appeared around the guy. He realized that it was a 12-hour fine and glass. Now it's time to reach the third circle. He used magic, opened the book and touched it, preparing to take on the next trials. Just a few seconds later, he disappeared, back into the book. Opening his eyes, he did not understand what this dim, empty space was. Another dimension inside the book. Suddenly, a girl appeared next to him, greeted him, and said that he was on the second page of the tests. Her name was Beta, and she was the conductor of the second page test. Hyul wondered if this test would be like the first one. Then the task was given by Alpha, the guide of the first page. It consisted of establishing the final order in the elemental stone. The girl said that the second page tests the mastery of the current mana circles. The details of the test will be revealed as you progress through it, and if successful, pages 32 through 81 will open, containing information about the third circle of mana. Hyul was shocked and did not believe that this was possible. He was surprised that they immediately gave him the 81st page, because he thought that they would give him no more than 15 pages. This, of course, was pleasing, but it meant that the third circle was on a completely different level, because the circle of the call of the heart and the circle of resonance were already good, but the new one was clearly many times different. The guy waited for him impatiently, but also with trepidation. Beta announced that the tests were beginning and disappeared. A voice appeared and said that he would now tell the student about the second test. Magic circles will appear in front of him, 100 in a row, and he will need to activate them all. When the first circle appeared, he did not hesitate to touch it with his hand. The teacher said that if he could synchronize his circle of resonance with each of them, they would activate naturally. Hyul continued to cast his spell, but suddenly noticed that the circle had changed. The voice said that each magic circle was renewed every 3 seconds, and if he didn't finish it within that time, he would have to start over, so he needed to be careful. Hyul thought that it would be enough to remember the sequence, but the teacher warned that it would change every time, so he realized that this test would definitely not be easy. He took a deep breath and decided it was time to give it a try. After some time, he was already standing in his room and looking at the book. His face was pale, and he himself was very tired. His head was almost out of order. He spent 8 hours on this, and the record was only 10 laps. Although he gradually adapted, intuition alone was not enough, and a pattern had to be identified. So he sat down among the mountains of books, began to study everything carefully and take notes. The teacher had previously said that Idrid was the only book he had written, and if he hit a wall, he should look for other manuscripts. They will definitely help him in his new achievements. Hyul was very surprised to hear that this book was not the only one of its kind, which meant that the time would come to search for new books. However, he did not know their location, or even their names. After a couple of minutes, he decided he needed some fresh air and a change of pace, so he went outside. Near the store, he was met by a girl with purchases. Hyul immediately recognized her as his classmate, Adela. They walked a little further together and sat down on a bench. Hyul noticed that they had been clashing quite often lately. He told the girl that she looked like she hadn't slept all night, and she admitted that she did. She said that she had read an interesting article. Its title was Possibilities of Technical Implementation of Teleportation Magic. Hyul noted that the title was controversial, and Adela agreed, but said that he should still read it. She handed him the tablet, and he began to read it carefully. At this time, Adela was sitting nearby and drinking banana milk. After some time, Hyul returned the tablet to her and said that it was interesting, but there was one peculiarity. They simultaneously stated that there was no logical conclusion. These conclusions were based on an analysis of information from ancient manuscripts by Rabel Whitener. Seeing this name, the guy experienced a strong shock. He reread the text again and realized that the structure and content were different. There were a number of theories put forward by Whitener himself, but the information was superficial and without much depth. Hyul asked the girl who wrote the article, and she admitted that it was Go Sang-jun. The guy was already in his room, sitting at the table and looking for something on his laptop. He recalled the name he had recently heard and knew that this magic researcher was so unknown that there was not even any information about his age or gender. Besides, this article was his only one, and he wondered if the criticism had put him off. This was the maximum that the guy could learn while remaining a simple student. He picked up the phone and started calling the head of the Blue Magic Tower. But Hyul himself was far from being an ordinary student. In the Blue Magic Tower, Kim Kang-un received a call from Hyul. The man had been exploring all night long and asked the guy what had happened to him. Hyul replied that he had found one thing that would benefit both of them. These words greatly surprised and interested Kim Kang-un. The guy asked the man to help him find one person. After some time, Hyul came to the Obelisk Academy and trained in the training hall. His opponent was Ji Suchan, who tried to fend off the guy's attacks. Hyul used wind magic, and several birds flew towards the enemy. Ji yelled at his friend, claiming it was a scam. Hyul didn't understand what the problem was, because it was only the first magic circle. Suchan was surprised that the guy was even asking, because in the first circle of magic, this was simply impossible. The guy tried with all his might to dodge and did somersaults. When the wind birds were very close, he used several shields from all sides. Hyul noticed that his friend was eventually able to block the attack properly. Ji Suchan said that now it was time to train in hand-to-hand combat. Hyul replied that he was not against it, but he doubted that the guy really believed in victory. With cheerful enthusiasm, Ji said that it was worth a try. Before he could do anything, Hyul ran up to him and grabbed him by the collar. He then used all his strength and flipped his opponent over. Everyone present in the hall was in complete shock. Hyul, looking at his friend, said that the idea was a bad one, because in hand-to-hand combat, there was nothing to modify. He added that it was the body fortified by the second circle versus the body fortified by the third that decided everything. And Ji asked if that was an insult. He thought it was unfair, because not only was his magic strong, but Hyul was also a beast in close combat. The guy thought that Hyul was playing dirty. The friend replied that if he was unhappy, he should train his endurance. Ji asked what his plans were, because he had heard that he was going to the Olympics. Hyul was surprised and did not understand how his friend found out about this. Suchan said that he had known him for a long time, and it was obvious, because he walked around all day immersed in himself. And even during the test of suppressing magic stones, he was constantly distracted. For the average student, the time to complete the course is 27 seconds, but he spent a full 74 seconds there. In recent days, whether it was training or a test, the guy always took first place by a wide margin. If he's going to compete with seniors at the Olympics, he mustn't lose his form. But in his current state, Hyul would not win the Olympics, and he himself understood this. Ji asked if he agreed with this, since he knew a lot. Besides, the main favorite of the Olympics is a fifth circle mage, so if he still only uses the second, victory is unlikely. Hyul realized that his friend was right, and if he wanted to perform well, he would have to try hard. He could temporarily speed up the second lap to the level of the third, but that was not enough. To fight on equal terms, he needs at least the fourth circle. And for that, he must find Go Sanjun. Following the map on his phone, Hyul approached the required address. Kanan apologized over the phone for being late, as he didn't think he'd be looking for someone for a whole week. But he admitted that this was his first time doing it. He approached and reported where Go Sanjun was now. Hyul was surprised to learn that this was the same used bookstore he often visited. He thought that the most inconspicuous places were always in plain sight, and he couldn't believe that it turned out to be right opposite the academy. After the boy was found incompatible with interactive magic, he began actively studying from books, including used ones. He wondered if he had taken Adred from this very library. Hyul approached the building, opened the door, and said hello. There was a guy sitting at the table, sorting through books. Upon seeing him, the shop owner greeted Hyul and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. The man said that everything was going as usual, and mentioned that he had heard about his success in magic. He noticed that Hyul now looked much healthier, and he thanked him. The man replied that there was nothing to be thanked for, since he only sold books, but it was thanks to them that the guy had come so far. He added that even if he was just selling them, he was pleased to hear such words, and asked why he had come. Hyul said he would like to meet Go Sangjun. The man was surprised why he needed this man and how he knew about him. Hyul explained that he read an article under his name, became interested, and asked his friends. He ended up here and apologized for secretly collecting information. He added that it was important to him and he really wanted to meet him. The man said he remembered something and agreed to arrange a meeting. Hyul was delighted, bowed and thanked him. The man interrupted him, saying that he was unlikely to get any answers at this meeting. The guy was surprised and didn't understand what he meant. The man said that he just needed to follow him and open the door, since Sanjun was inside. Together, they walked to the next door. The man said that the one he was looking for was right behind that door, and Hyul, opening it, was very surprised to see Go Sangjun. In the room, on the bed, lay a guy with dry lips and a breathing apparatus on his face. An IV was attached to his arm, and the rhythmic sound of the life support machine could be clearly heard. The father sadly stopped in front of his son's bed, who could not move. His face was pale. His hair seemed to have turned gray. His eyes were downcast and closed. Hyul was in complete shock when the man explained that this was his son, Go Sang-jan. Hyul asked if he could find out what happened. The man replied that of course he would tell, since his son had broken a taboo. This was the same taboo that concerned all wizards. He cast a mana circle through his brain, which was considered forbidden in the magical world. Hyul, hearing this, was very surprised, because it meant that the guy was trying to do the same thing as he did. He asked him why he decided to do something like that. The man explained that it was all for the sake of his scientific work. He had a choice, either prove the validity of his theory or give up halfway. And the first was only possible by launching mana directly into the brain. The man said he had to stop him at any cost. It thus appeared that this man had been introduced to Whitener's magical style through another source. The man admitted that he would hardly be able to answer all of his questions, but I am sure that my son would be very happy to discuss his work with the guy. Hyul didn't know that everything happened exactly like this, and he apologized because he shouldn't have started this conversation, realizing that this was a difficult time for the man. The man said that it was nothing to worry about because he knew how strong Hyul's passion for science was. He personally witnessed how meticulously the boy searched for magical literature every day, reminding him of his son in this. The boy approached the seller with a request, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, to let him look at the literature on which his son wrote his scientific work. The man was surprised by his interest in Sanjun's books, but said that they were gathering dust anyway, so it would be better to give them to someone who would find them useful. However, the man had two requests. If the boy wants to continue his son's scientific work on teleportation magic, he will have to list him as a co-author. Hyul replied that of course he would do so, and then the man moved on to the second request. Whatever the boy read, he shouldn't try to run a flow of mana through his brain, and Hyul promised to take that into account. The man led him into his son's room and said that this was where he had studied and left his books. He noted that these were probably the ones the boy would need most and pulled out several volumes. Suddenly, Hyul's attention was drawn to a very strange book. A second later, she fell off the shelf, which scared the guy a little. He looked at the book and realized that it reminded him of Adrid. While the man was collecting other books, the boy asked what the volume that had fallen out was. The man said that Sanjun often carried it with him, as if it contained something important. He added that the guy could take it. Perhaps the object of his interest would be found there. Hyul thanked him and opened the book, finding the same terrible handwriting inside. He realized that she and Adrid clearly had the same author. Hyul asked the seller if he could take the book to read, and the man agreed, saying that he could take whatever he needed. Hyul was delighted and thanked the man. Then he asked if he had ever come across a book with the same handwriting, or a luxurious red hardcover book. The man said he didn't remember anything like that, since luxury books were rarely found in their modest library. Hyul didn't understand where Sanjun got it from then. He wondered how Adred had ever fallen into his hands. Already in his room, he sat on the bed, looking at both books and thinking that he had searched through the entire library, but only this one looked like Adred. Even finding one such book was a success, and the guy was happy. When he took both books in his hands, a spark passed between them, and light appeared. The guy was shocked and didn't understand what this glow was. Suddenly the book opened. Magical flowers and objects fell out of it, and a voice said that he was bequeathing this book to the rightful owner of Adred. Hyul realized that he was being pulled back into the book. The voice said that this book was named Mimir, and the boy should enjoy its contents with all his heart. Before he was carried away, he realized that it was the teacher's voice, and he was drawn back into the book dimension. He woke up in an unknown room, with a teddy bear sitting next to him. The guy looked around and didn't understand where he was. Suddenly, someone came up to him from behind and touched his neck with a small hand. When he turned around, he saw a little girl, happy that he had been caught, and welcoming him into the Mimir book. Hyul looked at the stranger in surprise and asked who she was. There, smiling cheerfully, she replied that she was Mimir. She explained that she was responsible for a dimension called the Mimir Borehole. The girl extended her hand to the guy, said that she was glad to meet him, and called him her successor. Hyul asked what the Mimir Well was, and the girl explained that that was the name of this library. Rachel Whitener specially prepared this place for his successors. The library is intended for those who follow the path of the teacher. Hyul noted that it looks rather modest for a library in the conventional sense. The girl explained that this was because his achievements were still modest, and the Mimir Well was capable of expanding depending on the successor's level. Judging by the current size, the guy didn't even pass the second page test. After this, she asked the guest to address her informally. She added that they would see each other often, and formalities would only create unnecessary discomfort, so they should switch to informal terms. Hyul smiled and agreed with her words. The girl noted that he was quite good, since he managed to find her already on the second lap, and this was amazing. Hyul asked what was so significant about him finding her so quickly, and she replied that it meant he could easily reach the fifth circle straight away. Hearing this, Hyul was shocked. Already the fifth circle? How is this possible? Mimir began to cast a spell and flew into the sky. A book slid out of one of the shelves and flew towards her. The girl handed him a book and said that he should read it, and then he would understand everything. Hyul opened the book and realized that it was resonance theory in all its details. Mimir explained that in this place he would find all the information that could not be contained in Adrid, including information about the book he was holding. The guy asked why not just include it in Idrid. She replied that Adrid was already overloaded with a large number of pages of tests to thoroughly test the successor. There are other reasons why Idrid contains only the bare essentials, which necessitated the creation of separate books. Hyul asked whether the teacher had written in more detail in the Mimir well. She explained that Adrid contains the main points, while this book is better viewed as a reference book. He asked if all the books contained information of a certain level and if their number would grow along with his achievements. Mimir confirmed that this was so, and asked if he would now figure out how to reach the fifth circle. The guy replied that of course it would be easier for him to cope with the second test. He opened the book, and all the hieroglyphs in it began to glow, and he read attentively. Suddenly he found himself in another dimension, flying and rejoicing that he had reached the 79th circle. The second test required him to activate 100 magic circles, but during the first attempt, he was only able to activate 10 circles in 8 hours. After visiting the Mimir well, his result was 79 laps in one go. It's been too hard, until now. However, if he tried hard, he could handle 100 that night, and if he was unlucky, he could do it the next night. Getting hold of Mimir's book before the Olympics was pure luck. Hyul walked down the corridor of the mansion behind the maid. He wondered why his father had called him, and if it had anything to do with the compensation he had received after the incident with Sayuk. The boy had planned to study with Mimir again after class, but it seemed the matter was important. The maid announced to the man that his son had arrived, and he allowed him in. Hyuk glared at his son, ordered him to sit down, and said he would be brief. Unlike last time, it was not 100% his merit, and his contribution could be estimated at a little more than half. In the previous case, the guy received 26% of the shares in the magic stone mines. This was a significant advantage, so the guy deserved a corresponding reward. Father asked Hyul if he had already decided what he wanted. The boy, without hesitation, replied that he wanted an ancient relic kept deep in the family treasury. Hyuk was very surprised, because ancient relics are rare, holding incredible secrets, and they are not just antiques. Hyul objected that he did not consider them a myth, and believed that the legends and events described in myths were true. The father understood that his son was still young, and it was rather naive to believe this. He respected his choice, but warned him that he could only take one item. Hyul beamed with happiness and thanked his father. Hyuk asked what kind of relic he wanted. The guy said he wanted an ancient relic kept under the treasury, namely, Raybal Whitener's cloak. Together, they descended into the underground treasury of the entire Shin family. There, the man handed Hyuk a box with golden patterns. The father handed it over and said that he hoped his son would not regret this choice. Hyul replied that he was very happy and thanked his father. Hyuk couldn't even believe that the guy had bought into such stupid stories, but it was probably because he was young. However, he must focus on training so that he does not have any regrets in the future, and now return to himself. The black limousine in which Hyul was sitting was driving along the road. He thought that most of the heirlooms their family possessed were genuine. If this is indeed Raybal Whitener's coat, then it's wonderful. No 30% of the income from the magic stone mines can compare to it. But is it really real? Hyul decided to open the box in case it was a fake. He took out the cloth and was completely shocked to see fibers made of pure mana. Mana cloth is a valuable material obtained from magical stones through special processing. There are fewer than 30 craftsmen in the entire world who can perform such processing, but this cloak is made not partially, but entirely from mana fibers. Moreover, this technology was not available in their time, as this fabric surpasses all known artifacts made of mana fibers. The boy had never seen anything like it before. Already in his room, he sat and looked at the cloak. He noticed the painting on it and the terrible handwriting. That's why he believed that this was the work of his teacher, since he was already used to deciphering his scribbles. But he didn't understand what was happening, because the structure of the fabric seemed to be mixed up with the outer and inner layers. Another reason why working with mana fabric is difficult is that the outer and inner layers must be developed separately from each other. The inner layer should improve conductivity and mana efficiency, while the outer layer, on the contrary, should reduce conductivity, reducing incoming damage. But this cloak has the exact opposite design. The outer layer attracts mana and increases damage to the mage, while the inner layer blocks it, reducing the power of outgoing spells. The teacher would never have made such mistakes, and the boy decided that he simply needed to turn the cloak inside out. With a little effort, he turned the cloak inside out, but even so, the structure of the inner and outer layers did not change places. So it turns out that this was done intentionally. But for what purpose? Hyul couldn't understand whether it really was an ancient relic, and why his father had sent it to gather dust in storage. The book of Mimir opened, began to shine, and sweets and toys fell out of it. A couple of seconds later, the guy found himself in another space. He was greeted by Mimir, who was reading a book with stuffed animals, and asked how he was doing. She immediately noticed the magic cloak in his hands. As she got closer, she realized it was Rabel Whitener's cloak. She was surprised that the guy had already found it because he was simply amazing. Hyul said that this cloak was somehow strange and handed it to the girl. Mimir looked at him for a while and then cried out, "Ouch!" She asked the successor, he was still on the second round, and the guy did not understand what this question was about. But now it became clear why he still didn't know. And Hyul said that he wanted to know how this thing could be used. The girl apologized because she was sorry, but she could not explain why the cloak was designed this way. Hyul didn't understand why, and Mimir handed the cloak back to him. She explained that there is a special magic to Whitener's style. She immediately covered her ears, because she shouldn't have said this, but she got confused. In the end, she only told him that in the style of Whitener, there is a special magic, which is called true. It is different from the usual magic, because true magic is real. Hyul wondered if he was still using fake magic. The girl replied that unfortunately, this was true, and she could not reveal the whole truth about true magic until he reached a certain level. Hyul rubbed his chin and asked if this was some kind of limitation. Mimir replied that yes, this cloak was an artifact created to aid in the creation of true magic. The boy asked if this meant that Mimir would not tell him anything about her, and she noted that he was a quick learner. Hyul asked what level of circle he needed to get an explanation about this artifact. Mimir was silent for a moment, and then said that he needed the 5th circle of magic. More precisely, mastery of the 5th circle to open the 5th page of trials. After all, the magic of the 5th circle of the Whitener style will shine even brighter from this level. Hyul was making very good progress, and now it's the 98th circle, the 99th. And when he reached 100, all the circles exploded, and fireworks appeared in the sky. Hyul was happy because he had finally succeeded. The teacher congratulated him on passing the second test, which must have been quite tiring. But the boy had worked hard. Now the teacher was going to teach him how to weave the 3rd circle of magic. The 3rd level of the Whitener style is called the Circle of Interaction. Hyul sat in his cloak and closed the book, because he had successfully passed the second test. And now it is time to create the 3rd circle of magic. If he hadn't had the cloak and the Mimir well, the second test would have taken much longer. The night before, in the Mimir well, the girl said that the boy needed the magic of the 5th circle. Hyul, having heard all this, realized that he had no choice. Until he becomes a 5th circle master, he will have to put this thing on the back burner. Mimir stopped him because she couldn't send such a valuable thing to gather dust in storage. But the guy didn't understand how to use it, because the outer and inner layers were mixed up and would only get in the way. Mimir took the cloak and said that it allows one to prevent mana from leaking out by locking it inside, which will allow the boy to reach a state of mana overload. If he has an excess, the circle of infinity will rotate even faster, which means the mana filling his brain will also increase. In other words, he will be able to get rid of fatigue faster, and the same applies to physical exhaustion. Hyul replied that he realized that wearing a cloak would reduce his sleep time. Mimir said that with this cloak, you don't have to sleep at all anymore. Hyul was surprised. Did he really not need to sleep at all? Mimir confirmed that this is indeed the case, adding that if you wear it for at least 5 hours a day, it will quickly reach its peak. And that's just one of the side effects of the cloak that might not be worth sharing with your successor. Hyul said that he would definitely reach the 5th circle as quickly as he could. The girl told him that this work only works on the successor, but for an ordinary person it is poison, and the guy replied that he understood everything. With such a cheat item, subsequent tests would be a piece of cake. And so, 2 days later, he was sitting in his room. He was so close, but there was still a feeling that something was missing, and he thought that he would soon figure out how to reach the circle of interaction. The interaction circle, the 3rd circle of the Whitener style, allows one to interfere with the spellmaking process of others. To interact with someone else's mana, you need to be perfectly in sync with it. Now it was clear why it was necessary to synchronize all those circles, to learn how to influence other people's magic. Hyul smiled because it sounded very interesting. But, frankly speaking, he had never even thought about this and did not expect that the second test would serve as a basis for the creation of the third magic circle. To weave the third circle, the heart call and resonance circles must be in perfect harmony and connect well with the surrounding mana. Continuing to use resonance, the boy formed a third circle. He stood up and decided that this time he would succeed. He tried to gather the images in the air and synchronize them together, taking into account the excess of mana in his body. It was like building a new house, brick by brick, and he was sitting in the lotus position with colorful loops swirling around him. Mana found refuge in his body, and everything he absorbed responded with voices. These voices whispered that they wanted to play, and that it was so warm here that they didn't want to go outside. The guy had already come this far, but it was only halfway there, and he had to maintain the resonance. The spirits joked that they needed a spacious playground, and they joined hands, stood in a circle, and began to sing and dance. Hyul felt hot, because if the mana deviation rates differed by more than 1%, his body was not able to accommodate it. So far, he had only been interfering with things that didn't deviate from 1%, and it was necessary to gradually reduce the deviation rate to 0.1%. He did all this by directing the circle's mana quietly, carefully, and almost unnoticed by those around him. Morning came, and the guy, exhausted from the night's work, sat right on the cold floor. He raised his head, and large drops of sweat slowly ran down his tired face. He rose to his feet and realized with satisfaction that everything was finally ready. He activated the first circle magic, called First Call of the Heart. He then used his other hand to launch a second-level circle known as Resonance, and immediately, without wasting any time, he used the third-level circle, Interaction. Hyul, having finally obtained the third circle of interaction, strove to become a master of the fifth circle as quickly as possible. After some time, the guy was lying on a tree, and several birds were sitting on him. He was thinking about the combat survival test, which was a large-scale test on spacious training grounds. Typically held in the rocky terrain of Gangwon Province, the test lasts 32 hours, and each student is given special and evaluation artifacts. It was a simple test that required the participant to survive as long as possible in a gradually shrinking zone over a period of 32 hours. Hyul glanced at his watch and realized it was time to move out. The difficulty was that it was necessary to survive not only in battles with monsters, but also with other students, and also to earn points. When a strange sound was heard, the bird sitting on the guy fluttered up and flew away. His classmate stood under the tree, aiming his fire magic at Hyul. The guy reacted instantly, jumped from the tree, dodged the attack, and landed nearby. The schoolboy noticed that Hyul was dodging, but he was sure that he would not be able to escape anyway. Hyul swung his fist, intending to hit his opponent, but the latter created a barrier and mockingly asked if Hyul was seriously going to fight with his fists. Hyul used interaction magic and touched the barrier. The barrier cracked and began to collapse, causing great surprise to the enemy. Then Hyul used Earth Push, and the boy flew to the side. The enemy was amazed that his barrier could not withstand even a simple push from the earth. Hyul asked which of the two was the fool, since the enemy had attacked from behind. He noted that he shouldn't have started shouting, as this only revealed his presence. Hyul thought that perhaps this was the real power of interaction that he had just used. He easily broke the core of the second circle's barrier, allowing it to be broken through with a normal push from the first circle. The voice announced the elimination of student Kan Jirak. Hyul left, arguing that his opponent had exposed himself, and that was why everything had worked out. The watch on his wrist showed that he had received 10 points, which was a good start. As he wandered through the forest, he thought that he seemed to have already become addicted to the new circle, and would soon begin to use it against the magic of the third circle. Suddenly, something ran quickly behind him. Hyul turned around in surprise and looked in that direction. Then he used magic and threw a fireball there. Before he could react, he saw blood-claw wolves appear from both sides and surround him. They seemed to be attracted by the sounds of the recent battle. If he were an ordinary student, he might have complained about the injustice, or even cried. However, Hyul was one of those who was unconditionally aiming for first place, and was only happy with this turn of events. One of the wolves raised its head and began to howl. After this, the whole pack rushed at Hyul, but he was ready to attack. At this time, someone, sitting at a tablet, watched his fight. They listed the names of students worth noting: Adela Stewart, Ji Suchan, Kim Kang-soo, and Ma Jae-hak. If things continue at this pace, these students will definitely make it into the top 10, although it will be difficult to hold out until the end. The girl noted that now no one doubts Shin Haiyul's outstanding skills. Instructor Guo Changsu watched his battle with close attention and interest. Then he smiled and agreed with his assessment. Another man noted that the guy clearly didn't look like an amateur ready to be expelled, since he had taken first place by a wide margin during training. Now he was leading with an unrivaled result. What was surprising was that he knew the habits of the blood claws and deliberately waited until they had gathered the entire pack. This was astonishing because if Blood Claw gives a signal, all of his kin within a 5-kilometer radius will flock to help, and Haiyul used this to earn more points. If he continues in this same spirit, then winning the Olympics is quite within his capabilities. Haiyul had already defeated all the enemies and stood there trying to catch his breath, estimating that this was worth 60 points. Suddenly, something strange started to happen, and he couldn't understand if it was an earthquake or something else. But the earth was moving. The soil beneath his feet disappeared and was replaced by emerald crystals. Haiyul already realized that it was a huge carcass, the shell of which shone like emeralds. Beneath it was a giant emerald turtle. He became curious about where such a rare monster could have come from. Haiyul realized that he was seeing this animal in person for the first time. He decided it was time to fight this giant. At the Obelisk Academy and the Tower of the Examination Committee, people watched what was happening. People usually run away from such a huge thing, because this turtle provides many options for interaction between students and is the rarest monster of the training ground. Even a genius like Shin Haiyul couldn't handle her alone. The Emerald Turtle is a famous 4th-rank, C-class reptilian monster. She has incredibly high defense stats and is the natural enemy of all wizards. The turtle screamed loudly, stuck out its tongue, and rushed towards the guy. For killing such a monster, you get a huge amount of points. Haiyul skillfully dodged the turtle, jumping to the side. Suddenly, the monster began to wave its long tail. Haiyul reacted instantly and put up a magical barrier. However, the monster's blow was so strong that the barrier cracked. A woman watching the fight noticed that he was using the barrier as a support platform, but it couldn't hold up, as the Emerald Turtle was an opponent that was too much for even many 6th Circle mages. Haiyul jumped back several times and cast the Flame Volcano spell. After that, he jumped to the side, wondering if the attack would work. But the turtle stood firm, uninjured, and screamed furiously. Haiyul realized that defeating such a monster, even with the 5th Circle, would be extremely difficult, and began to run away. He couldn't understand if the monster was so fast because of the mana in its body. Running further and further, Haiyul came up with a brilliant plan and decided to try it. He sat down on the ground and began to cast a spell, strengthening his leg. When the turtle tried to attack, the boy jumped aside. The force of her head's blow is capable of shattering a centuries-old tree in an instant, and if you miss even one such blow, not even a trace will remain. However, simple errands would not bring victory, so it was necessary to fight. When the turtle attacked again, he used the magic barrier again. He noted that the monster's power was truly enormous. Realizing that he had underestimated the enemy and would not be able to block the next attack, he used resonance magic. Such a face-to-face confrontation incapacitates the monster for a period of time while it recovers its strength. After waiting for the right moment, the guy immediately used Wen magic. He remembered reading a picture book as a child that said the emerald tortoise had weak ligaments for the speed it could achieve. That's why immediately after the attack, she loses mobility to relieve the strain on her ligaments. And now was that very moment. It was a chance to win, and he used the Ice Spear spell. Everyone watching the battle was in complete shock. Haiyul just activated the interaction and struck the turtle. She screamed and blue blood gushed from her mouth. The monster fell on its back, splitting its emerald shell and leaving a huge hole in its stomach. Tired Haiyul was breathing heavily and was glad that he had managed to win. They announced that he would receive 10,000 points. In-hyuk sat in his room in front of the huge screen and watched his son fight. Although the emerald turtle is particularly vulnerable to ice, the boy managed to overcome it with a 3rd circle spell, which seemed incredible. Seokhyun apologized and admitted that he himself did not understand anything. Apparently so, but the monster must have natural resistance, and the ability to obtain food is an important condition of the survival test, and the guy learned this instantly. In-hyuk said that he didn't raise his son to be a weakling. Seokhyun asked if he could ask one question. Why is Haiyul acting so brazenly? If Jihan or Xia saw the broadcast, it would be considered a challenge. In-hyuk responded that in the past, due to his limited abilities, his son dropped out of the race for the position of head of the family. As a result, his position in the family sank below the plinth. But now, everything has changed. Hyul had somehow gained unprecedented power, and his progress in magic could not be denied. A few months before the Olympics, he asked for protection from the threat of his brothers and sisters. Therefore, Hyul can afford to stand out and do extraordinary things. This way, he will attract public attention, strengthen his position, and quickly increase his power. This is necessary so that after the end of the protection period, neither Jihan nor Xia pose a threat to him. Meanwhile, the guy was frying turtle meat over a fire and seasoning it. On the first day of testing, fights are prohibited between 11 o'clock in the evening and 1 o'clock in the morning. The boy knew it was done for safety reasons, but he believed that by making things easier for the students in this way, contrary to the original rules, they would learn little. Previously, the training of magicians in some countries was quite brutal, so this change was necessary. This time, they allowed him to take magical devices with him, which meant that Hyul could get rid of his fatigue with the help of the teacher's robe. Hyul decided that the meat wasn't so bad and had a snack. Having eaten a few pieces, the guy was glad that he was full. Suddenly, he heard a noise from the side and turned around. Adela and Suchan stood there, no less surprised than he was. When they all sat around the fire, Hyul asked how it happened that they were wandering through the forest together. Adela said they bumped into each other right before the break and had a little argument, and Ji said the girl brutally hit him. Hyul suggested that after the battle ended, Suchan simply crawled towards the enchanting aroma of food, and the guy confirmed that this was exactly how it happened. He smelled this divine scent and asked Hyul if he would treat them. Hyul said that it was his food, but Adela and Suchan reminded him that there had never been a concept of yours and mine between them. Hyul finally agreed, since he would have thrown out the excess anyway. Suchan took a huge piece of meat and noted how delicious it smelled, and Adela also ate and thanked him for the treat. Together, they ate with gusto and realized how delicious the dish was, and Hyul felt like a chef. Adela asked if this was honey bear meat. The honey bear is a bear-like monster that lives in the forest and whose roasted meat has a delicate flavor. Adela heard that this was not true, because only 2 local monsters had meat suitable for food. These are the honey bear and the emerald turtle, while others have it either poisonous or tasteless, so they are not eaten. Then she suspected that the guy might have killed the emerald turtle. Hyul replied that this was exactly what happened, and he had done it during the day in the west. Suchan was shocked because he only caught a glimpse of the turtle and did not believe that the guy managed to kill it. Hyul told Suchan that he shouldn't open his mouth while he was eating, and even though he knew this, he still thought his friend was very cool. Adela said that she had never heard of a wizard below the 5th circle of magic being able to defeat the emerald turtle. Hyul wanted to say something, but suddenly began to cast Flame Volcano. A high red hurricane formed around him. Adela immediately realized that this was 3rd circle magic. She didn't believe that he could modify her to the power of the 6th circle because it seemed impossible. Hyul said nothing and simply stopped casting his spell. He thought that this was still the 3rd circle, just strengthened by the teacher's technique. Ji asked how the guy won, whether he really hit the turtle in the head, but he replied that he simply pierced its shell. Suchan didn't believe it, but Hyul insisted that this was how it was. Surely the recording taken by the Academy's drones has been preserved and will be available for viewing after the tests are completed, although Hyul assumed that the guys would see her first. After all, tomorrow they will fight fair and square. Ji shouted that he would win, and Adela wished him luck. She added that she also had something she wanted to show him. At dawn, the 2nd day of testing began. There were 2 hours left before the survival zone's radius would shrink, and only 4 were left in the game. Everyone was wondering who would emerge victorious in this fight. Hyul was walking through the forest and suddenly heard some rustling. He turned around and used wind spear magic. All the spears flew in one direction, where a ball of smoke formed. Some guy said that this is not just a rumor, but a real supernova explosion. His classmates stood on the shield above Hyul. He immediately landed and tried to hit the guy with his huge fist. Hyul noted how fast his opponent was, and when he kicked him, he dodged, falling to the ground. This guy, the magical wind cutter, only created the appearance of danger, but the real threat came from his close combat, and his roundhouse kick missed the target by a millimeter. The guy told Hyul that he was unlucky to run into him. It was a wizard who specialized in close combat, Ji Sangwok, but Hyul apologized and said that he thought he was just lucky. In the past, Sangwok easily defeated one guy. The girls whispered that he was handsome and that body enchantment was a really powerful thing. Among second-year students, he was among the top in 2 martial arts. He was also an expert in body enchantment, and he was clearly not someone that interaction could help against. Then Hyul also decided to use the combat skills from the body enchantment. Sandwalk noticed the frequent direct confrontation and said it was cool. The committee announced that it seemed both students had chosen the combat magic of body enchantment. In this fight, Sandwalk was definitely the favorite, the man asked. Among the second years, his combat skills were undoubtedly the best, as he had won the junior national competition using body enchantment. The professor said that, however, given Hyul's fight with the emerald turtle yesterday, his potential was immeasurable. Sandwalk actively tried to hit the guy, but he dodged. Hyul wasted no time and used his demonic eyes. Now he could see the mana streams of this guy, and it was concentrated right in his fist. And then she immediately jumped to the knee. So it would be a kick, and Hyul used a shield. The blow hit him really hard, but if he uses the barrier to pin the guy down, then everything will work out. Immediately, the defense shattered into pieces, and Sandvok flew back. The guy was surprised when he saw that Hyul had completely destroyed his own barrier. He had never seen such magic before, and thought that it seemed like the genius magician had really returned. Sandwalk began to worry, because these were clearly not just simple rumors. But now things were getting much more interesting. Although Sandvok had his own pride, and he had no intention of losing in close combat. Hyul waited for the moment, realizing that this was his chance, and gathered his mana in his fist. He swung and hit the guy, but he defended himself by crossing both arms. The commission was shocked because the guy was able to block the blow. After that, Sandwalk swung his leg and Hyul jumped back. Hyul was shocked that the enemy had managed to react, because his combat sense was quite good, but he lacked common sense. If he had disguised the flamethrower in a power attack, even using the barrier, both hands would have received serious damage at the last moment. Hyul approached the enemy with great speed, and the latter noticed his speed. Sandwalk crossed his arms again and assumed a fighting stance. Hyul asked if he still continued to defend himself in this way. After that, he launched a magical attack, because the armpit was open. Sandwalk thought that the enchantment of the guy's hands was just a feint, since he initially wanted to hit with his knee. He didn't understand when he managed to enchant his legs. Sandwalk touched his side and realized that he thought his rib was broken. But he was a real fighter, and he could endure such pain using only his willpower. He got into a fighting stance and moved to attack, because attack is everything for a fighter. Hyul said that if he relied too much on his strength, his body would quickly break down. Sandwalk ignored these words and jumped up to kick. Hyul managed to jump back and asked if the guy had overexerted himself. Sandwalk only managed to put his foot on the ground when a fist was already flying towards him. Hyul hit his enemy's chin with all his might with his knuckles. He flew to the side and hit his back painfully. Now he lay unconscious, and Hyul stood and stretched his arm. At one point, the guy concentrated mana in his lower jaw to reduce the damage. Hyul wiped his sweat with his t-shirt and realized that he knew everything, because the guy's fighting sense was incredible. He had not only offensive power, but also defense, and Sandwalk was clearly a tough opponent. As night approached, the barrier that marked the training area narrowed. Hyul looked at the watch on his hand and realized that there were only 3 survivors left, so he had only 2 enemies. And then Adela came out of the dark bushes and said that now was a great time for battle. The combat survival test has come to an end, and only 2 people remain among the last survivors. Adela and Hyul stood opposite each other and looked confidently into each other's eyes. Sia couldn't believe it, because the broadcast clearly showed that her brother was in the final of the challenge. They couldn't even lay a finger on him, and soon he would stop obeying them altogether. At this rate, my brother would once again become the heir, and that was unacceptable. When she asked Jihan's opinion, he simply remained silent. She turned to him again, believing that he should answer, since Hyul had managed to defeat the Emerald Turtle. She was perplexed as to how anyone could possibly defeat her at his level, especially on live television, which their father was probably watching. Just like the rest of the family, Jihan asked his sister to calm down. The girl screamed, not understanding how one could remain calm in such a situation. She wanted to say something else, but stopped when she saw her brother's gaze. He said he wouldn't repeat it twice. C feigned submission and asked for forgiveness, promising to remain silent and begging not to punish her. Jihan walked up to her, stroked her head, and asked what she was talking about. He saw no reason to punish her. After all, they were brother and sister. Sia sank to the floor and thanked him, and Jihan noted that their brother was very cunning and always seized on good opportunities. Despite the family ties, if he continues to muddy the waters, Jihan will not let it go. A powerful explosion was heard in the forest. Adela used a smart light bullet, deciding that she could no longer be caught off guard, since she had watched his fights tens of thousands of times. In that fight, he even used the sun, but now it was night. The moon illuminated everything with its soft light, and today everything was supposed to be different. The girl decided that she would not give him the slightest chance to counterattack. Hyul put his hands forward, creating a small wind hurricane directed at the girl. Numerous arrows immediately flew at him, and the guy tried to dodge. One of them grazed his shoulder, and he realized how dangerous the fire from the moon bullets was. The number of magic projectiles was much greater than in the transfer exams. It was impossible to dodge them all at once, and the girl knew that he was only capable of isolated weak techniques and was vulnerable to dense magical fire. She understood that this was his weak point, because in terms of speed and efficiency, she surpassed him in everything. Several magic circles appeared in front of her, and she cast an explosion spell. Hyul dodged with difficulty and, breathing heavily, remained alive. He managed to erect a barrier and remained unharmed, saying that she could think whatever she wanted. She tried to gain the upper hand through the superiority of the magic circle, which was the result of her analysis of his battles. Of course, such an intense magical bombardment was not within the power of everyone, which was expected from a representative of the Divine Guardian clan. That was exactly it, and he wondered since when she had mastered the fourth circle. Meanwhile, he began to conjure ice needles behind her back. Adela stopped the attack, saying that she knew he would notice. Hyul immediately enveloped his attack spell in smoke. The girl explained that she had mastered the fourth circle about 4 days ago, and that was not all. An ice arrow shot through the night sky and almost reached the girl. But Adela said that such tricks would no longer fool her. As the arrow approached, she destroyed it with her magic. Hyul immediately recognized the spell and realized that she had not only the fourth circle, but also heart guidance, which was excessive. Heart guidance was the secret magic of the noble French steward family. It was a special detection magic similar to the red eyes of Kim Kanun, the lord of the Blue Magic Tower. The current Adela combined the strengths of divine guardian magic, such as range, power, and variability, with the signature detection magic of the steward, making her an incredibly dangerous opponent. She was like a monster in human form. The guy had to give it his all. Adela decided that she would no longer give the enemy any favors. She remembered the magic he used to defeat the Emerald Turtle and wanted to see her again. At that very moment, several arrows flew towards Hyul. The guy replied that he was just about to show his strength. His eyes flashed as he activated his demon eye and saw that Adela's moonlight bullet contained moon attribute mana of 27.74. The dark attribute's mana was 71.33, while the water attribute's mana was less than 1 point, and its activation required the calculation of 12 magic formulas simultaneously. It also involved linking the graphs of Verdania's magical equations, and the boy used interaction magic. Adela was amazed that her bullet veered off course just before it hit its target, and couldn't figure out what trick he had used. Hyul asked her how she thought he had done it, and doubted that even her heart sight would have helped him understand it. At this time, in the estate of the House of Magicians, a man approached Inyuk. He had a glass of wine in his hand, and he didn't understand what kind of magic his brother had, and what kind of spell could change the structure of magic projectiles in such an unprecedented way. This man was the head of the Divine Guardian House, Wee Sang-chol. In-hyuk replied that he didn't understand either, and the man asked if his son had told him anything. In-hyuk replied that nothing, and Sang-chul said that it was unexpected for a guy to hide something from him. The man said that over the past year he has grown into a real impudent person. Now he has more secrets than revelations. Sanchal noted that it was understandable since Hyul had changed a lot in the year away from home. In-hyuk noted that this was largely true, and Sangchul said that it was true what they say, a man only grows up when he leaves his father's house. He admitted that during the transfer exams, he thought that Hyul was just lucky. He feels a little ashamed to say this in front of In-hyuk, because back then, he thought the boy's flash of fame was fleeting. In-hyuk replied that it was okay. He understood everything, because this child was incompatible with artificial intelligence. In the fight where he defeated Adela, it was clearly not due to superior skill, but rather strategy and technical execution. People began to analyze information about the guy and immediately exposed his weaknesses, after which they predicted his imminent defeat. This was especially obvious given Adela's analytical abilities. Sanchiel said that his daughter's analytical skills were excellent, but it seemed he had greatly underestimated the young man. The man admitted to In-hyuk that he was even grateful to Hyul. When his daughter lost her purpose in life, Her eyes were expressionless for the first time. Now they shone brighter than ever. He was genuinely happy that Hyul had returned, because even Jisoo now had his motivation back. In-hyuk, looking at the screen with his son's image, agreed with this. Such actions were truly worth thanking. The voice announced that the combat survival test was over, and the survivors must stop fighting immediately. Hyul was very surprised, but stopped fighting. When the smoke cleared, he saw Adela's face, wiping sweat from her forehead. The guy remarked that if he had a little more time, he would certainly have won. Adela replied that this would never have happened because she had the advantage. Suddenly, the professor appeared and said that they had to stop because they had to return to the tower. The next day, Adela tried to prove to the guy that she would have won their fight yesterday. Hyul replied that there was no point in dreaming because victory would have been his, as always. The girl said that she began to understand which way her magic was deviating, and she would have figured him out in 5 minutes. Hyul asked if that was really the case, because in 5 minutes, her brain would boil and she would lose. Ji Soo-chan silently watched their conversation. He said that if they were going to discuss this all evening, they should go into another room, because he didn't need them fighting. They both told him at the same time to shut up, because he was Mr. 26, out. Ji started crying because it was his room, and he called them to watch the fight footage, not to argue. They noticed pizza, drinks, and banana milk on the table and asked if he had bought all of this for them. The guy replied that yes, he tried very hard for them, but in the end, they made a scene. Hyul said that he was, as always, blocking the view, and decided to quickly settle everything, since they needed to review everything from the very beginning. The recording lasted 14 hours, and it was a very long time, but they watched everything. Ji Soo-chan was already in a sleepy state and was raving about monsters and tests. These words made Adela laugh, and Hyul asked why she was laughing. Adela covered her friend and said she was just having fun. Watching all 14 hours of footage was difficult, and she thought the guy would give up halfway through. Hyul noted that although Soo-chan cried, he couldn't handle anything, but he always tries his best. Adela smiled and said that he had good friends. Hyul replied that they were even too good. In his opinion, they were simply magnificent. Suddenly, Adela apologized, and her look became sad. Hyul didn't understand why he heard such words from her. The girl admitted that she pretended for a whole year that they were strangers, and continued to keep her distance. Now she realized how wrong she had been, and she felt very sorry. Hyul didn't understand what there was to apologize for, since he himself had rejected her attempts at communication. He said that he himself chose to keep his distance, and to be honest, he even tried to close himself off from Soo-chan. Soo-chan immediately woke up from these words, not believing what he heard, and asked if it was true. Hyul said that now he is not the same as he was a year ago, because he has gained new strength. And not only strength, but also new comrades. And I would like to show them both something. The guy put his hands forward and began to cast a spell, after which a sphere appeared between them. Ji and Adela watched this and couldn't believe it, because now he had moonlight bullets in his hands. Hyul says that this is exactly what his magic is. Ji realizes that this means that his modified magic is capable of interfering with the very formula of the enemy's magic spells. Hyul claims that this is exactly the case, and adds that he also received eyes that can see the structures of magical formulas. Adela is very surprised to hear about the formulas, and realizes that this is why he was able to decipher her family charms. Hyul explains that it is usually extremely difficult to change the spells of a secret school, but his personal development was the result of lengthy analysis. He notes that for such an intervention to occur, it is necessary to see the original spell up close at least several times. The magic he used to defeat the turtle back then was also modified, as he had carefully examined the monster's shell and applied a spell that reduced its durability. In fact, the monster's shield had a magical structure, and Adela says she now understands how it was able to change the trajectory of her magical projectiles. It turns out that in order to interfere with the structure of an opponent's spells, he needs to fully understand their formula, which is why he couldn't do anything at their first meeting, because he simply didn't understand how. Hyul replies that this is exactly the case, and notes that the girl quickly grasps the essence. In this match, he focused exclusively on his moonlight bullets, and was able to calculate their formula. But if he had used other charms, it would have been more difficult for the girl. Little did she know that using only moonlight bullets would prove to be a fatal mistake on her part. She asked if this magic had any weaknesses, and Hyul replied that calculating mana and attributes was quite complicated. Therefore, he can only interfere with those spells that he has seen up close, and in a real fight, this may not be possible, and in most cases, the trajectory will only change slightly. Adela asked if it was possible to turn the magic projectile 180 degrees and send it back to the enemy. Hyul said that there would definitely not be enough time for something like that in battle, and Adela added that mirroring spells would be cool. Suchan thinks that Hyul's charms are already too cheating. Hyul should have listened to him when he asked why he was revealing and discussing his secret weapon with Adela. Hyul asked if he didn't understand, and Adela also asked why he didn't understand, and Ji didn't understand what they were talking about. Adela and Hyul simultaneously said one word: Olympics. Hyul said that Adela and Suchan will perform with him because they have to help him. Suchan first burst into tears from the touchingness of these words, and then stopped. He said that Adela was still okay, but he was not strong enough for such a competition. The selection is conducted among second and third year students, and therefore, it will be difficult to get a place in the academy. Hyul told him not to worry, because he would get his participation one way or another. Adela noted that there will be many obstacles, but Hyul's interaction is their main advantage. If it's allowed to be used in a match, then a team fight where they have to protect their magic stone while destroying enemy cannons will be within their power. Or a match where you have to steal a flag from the enemy base while defending your own would also be a winning option. Hyul said that they have team or siege battles in their pocket, not counting everything else. Adela asked if he had any other cards. Hyul smiled slyly and said that of course he had them. A couple of hours later, he found himself in his room wearing a cloak and leafing through a book. He realized that everything was ready and it was time to begin, after which he began to cast a spell and touched the Book of Mimir. At this time, the girl in the room was lying on the sofa and reading a book, when suddenly a guy appeared and she greeted him. Mimir said that he came later than she expected, and she just hoped he wouldn't say that he didn't take first place. Hyul boasted that, of course, he took it, since the points for defeating the Emerald Turtle decided everything. He asked if she remembered saying that they were going to win a gold medal in one of the important competitions. Mimir replied that of course she remembered, and asked if he was talking about the Olympics, to which Hyul confirmed, and said that he had discussed it with friends and mentioned interaction. Mimir was surprised and asked if he hadn't said that they needed to be fully prepared before telling their friends, since everything had happened too quickly. Hyul replied that everything happened just in time. He noted that he had only recently mastered interaction to perfection. Mimir screamed with joy and said that the guy was simply amazing. Hyul asked her to look for destruction-level books for him. He explained that it was time to move on to the third magical circle of destruction. When Hyul was in his room, he received a call. He realized that it was the Lord of the Tower and answered the challenge. Kanan said that he saw the broadcast and was shocked because the guy single-handedly defeated the Emerald Turtle, and it was amazing. He added that fighting on equal terms with Adela, who already had the fourth circle, and breaking through the turtle's shell was incredible. Kanan noted that he saw the girl's moonlight bullets change trajectory at the last moment. At first, he thought that Hyul was using some kind of mana-distorting field, but he realized that was not the case. Hyul said that he sincerely apologizes, but he cannot yet reveal the secrets of his magic. Kanan replied that he got too carried away and asked for forgiveness, since the guy didn't have to answer. He acknowledged that the magician had a right to his secrets. He noted that Hyul's magic was incredibly interesting and expressed hope that he would be able to figure it out himself. He then admitted that he called Hyul because he was asking about the elemental stone. Hyul asked if there was good or bad news. Kanan came to the right room and said that the news was good, because now everything was ready and the stakes could be raised. Hyul was very surprised and asked if his people were tired of working all this time. Kanan replied that not at all, because everyone here is a creator to the core, and it is impossible to tear them away from the elemental stones. As expected, they were ready to work hard. Kanan said that overall the guy shouldn't worry, as he will definitely get his artifact. Hyul thanked him and added that he was looking forward to it, after which the man was about to say goodbye and hang up. But Hyul stopped him, saying that he had one more request. Kanan asked if they were talking about compensation for the incident with Lang Smith. Hyul replied that this was not entirely true, and depended on how the Lord of the Magic Tower perceived it. Kanan said that it sounded intriguing, and he was curious to see what the guy would suggest this time, so he listened carefully. Hyul said that before this year's Olympics, he would like to ask the creator of the artifacts from the Blue Magic Tower to join the national engineering team. Mimir, hearing that Hyul needed to fight the owner of the fifth magic circle, was in complete shock. Hyul explained that these were the conditions of the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower. He wondered if he was taking this too lightly. Kanan had previously asked him if he wanted his man to officially become a developer for the Olympics, and, having heard a positive answer, he immediately refused. Hyul thought that everything was exactly as he expected, because it was simply not beneficial for the man. Kanan explained that in any other case he would have said the same thing, but if Hyul defeats a 5th circle mage one-on-one, he will reconsider his decision. Hyul didn't hesitate for a second and immediately agreed. Kanan asked if he knew that among the foreign participants in the Olympics this year, there would be 2 5th circle magicians. He noted that he had no doubt in the guy's skills, but introducing his own man would require colossal expenses, and he wouldn't go for it just like that. Hyul first had to prove that he was capable of winning a gold medal. Mimir asked what he was going to do, since in his current state, it was practically impossible to defeat the 5th circle mages. Hyul replied that this was for now and asked for a 10-day delay. Mimir asked if he was going to take measures and prepare for battle during this time. Hyul said he had a couple of ideas for preparation, but perfecting them in 10 days would be difficult. He noted that it was really worth taking such measures for the sake of the engineer from the Blue Magic Tower, because otherwise, everything would lose its meaning. In the country, only masters of the Blue Magic Tower can gain access to customizing artifacts for the Olympics. Mimir guessed that this place must be truly amazing. She noted that artifacts made by ordinary craftsmen and those made by the masters of the Blue Magic Tower differ by at least 10%. Moreover, nowadays, only the masters of the Blue Magic Tower are able to perform the attunement of elemental mana stones. Thus, the difference in artifact setup can have a decisive impact on winning competitions, and their support will clearly not be superfluous. They came to the conclusion that it was absolutely necessary to involve these masters, and Mimir asked when he planned to begin the 3rd stage of the test. Hyul said that he was first going to study all the books that the girl had prepared for him. Mimir was surprised by this and noted that this was a good attitude. She added that when he began the 3rd test, he should convey her greetings and praise for his efforts. Hyul was very surprised and asked if she knew anyone there, but the girl replied that it was a secret. She explained that if she said it now, it wouldn't be as interesting. The opulent hall welcomed everyone who came to the celebration of the House of Magicians subsidiary, and expressed hope that the guests would have a good time. Someone noticed that, as expected, the eldest son of the company's head, the president of the branch, was speaking. The man said he considered this to be actual confirmation that he had been chosen as the next head of the family. But Jihan replied that he was being flattered and was simply lucky. He added that everything he has is thanks to his friends. Someone said that the House of Mages definitely has a bright future. The interlocutor agreed, adding that even the youngest son of the family distinguished himself. Jihan got angry and looked at the one who said this. The man asked if everyone had seen the broadcast where the young man defeated the Emerald Turtle on his own. He added that once you are called a genius, you will remain a genius forever. Someone asked if anyone remembered his fight with Adela Steward, who is already a 4th circle mage. Moreover, the guy encountered the Divine Guardian clan's secret technique of the moon attribute and managed to withstand it, which is truly incredible. After this, one would hardly dare call him unfit, because, hiding their faces, people might think that this was a real fight between adult magicians. Everyone at the event was actively discussing Hyul. Someone said they were looking forward to his participation in the upcoming Olympics. Surely the head of the family was also impressed by Hyul's performance. Jihan stood in a crowded room, but he felt lonely because everyone was talking about his younger brother. Someone said that he personally believes that the younger, talented brother will take the position of heir. Jihan remembered how in the past he looked at his brother with envy because everyone only talked about him. He quickly learned to cast spells, which irritated him the most, and Jihan hated him, deciding one day to get rid of him. Someone asked Jihan how he was doing, but he was no longer there. The man left, leaving only a broken glass of wine on the floor. Jihan went outside, took a deep breath of fresh air, and straightened his tie. He thought that all this was very bad, because this boy was bothering him. This means that he must die in the near future. Hyul was sitting in the library and reading a book. After a couple of hours, the mountain of books he had read grew larger and larger. He closed the last one and said everything was fine. Mimir asked if he had finished reading already, and the boy replied that if that was all the literature, then he thought he had finished. Mimir said that it turns out that he has studied all the basics concerning destruction, but did he understand them? Hyul admitted that he didn't really understand anything, but at least now he has an idea about this circle. He figured out how it worked a little, and Mimir said it was normal that he couldn't figure everything out right away. After all, if you tell a person who has never had wings how to use them to fly, it's unlikely that he will understand everything. Until a guy encounters destruction directly, there is no way he can achieve it. Mimir showed him the drawing, and the boy said it was so-so, but he seemed to understand what she was trying to convey. Mimir was upset because it was her masterpiece. Hyul understood that he truly had to face destruction, which meant he had no choice but to enter the 3rd page of trials. Mimir said that everything was correct, and the boy would receive all the answers on the third page of the tests. Hyul asked if this was the man she had asked to convey her greetings to and who would teach destruction. The girl replied that if he was so interested, he should go and ask himself, since he had already finished reading the books. Hyul asked her to tell him at least something, but she couldn't talk about the third page of tests. Mimir said there were no restrictions and reminded that they had given each other their word. Hyul found himself in his room and couldn't understand what kind of promise she had made that she wouldn't even say an extra word about the test. The guy took the book and began to cast a spell to get into space. He thought that it would be better to find out the reason directly on the third page of the test. A tree, branches, leaves, and a portal appeared beneath him. The boy hoped that it would become clearer to him and closed his eyes. And when he opened them, he was in complete shock because he was surrounded only by forest. And not just any old one, but with disproportionately tall trees all around. And he didn't know where such trees could be found. The boy thought that he would be transported to another dimension, like the previous times. But here, no one met him. Not even the teacher's voice was heard. Hyul walked forward and wondered if this entire area was really a page of trials. The forest was so vast that it eventually reached the edge of the cliff. The boy was delighted because the teacher's magic surpassed all the limits of his imagination. No matter how long he walked, there was no end in sight. Hyul approached the clear lake and wondered if this place itself could be a test. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, and everything around him shook. At first, he thought it was an earthquake, but then he decided it was something else, as if something unknown was looking at him. Hyul turned his head to the side and met the gaze of a huge red dragon. There were sharp scales on his back, and horns and sharp claws on his paws. Hyul looked at him and did not understand anything. This monster was already so close, but the guy didn't even notice its approach. When the monster roared, the boy fell into the water. Hyul immediately noticed the monster's vertical pupil, characteristic of reptiles. Its armored scales resembled those of a crocodile. The claws and fangs were razor sharp, and there was no doubt this was a beyond A-rank, disaster-level Drake monster. Hyul thought these creatures were imaginary, but now he realized that the conditions of the test were to defeat him. The guy started to get really worried. Sweat was pouring down his face because it seemed impossible, and he couldn't even move. The slightest breath from this creature made the mana in the air tremble, and it was on a completely different level compared to the monsters the boy had encountered before. In Drake's eyes, Hyul was nothing more than a sweet mana berry, just prey, and he doubted he could even escape from him. And then he realized that it was impossible. Even with all the speed he had developed during training, he couldn't overtake Drake, and the biggest problem was that his body refused to move. If the monster attacks, it will all be over. Hyul was very surprised to notice that the monster was not approaching. He wondered if there was anything stopping him. Suddenly, the boy heard someone's voice saying that he was impressed by all of this. Someone's elegant feet stepped on the water and walked towards him. The girl said that even in the face of a monster beyond his category, Hyul does not give up, and his will is like steel. Despite the hopeless situation, he keeps himself under control and does not panic. She announced that the test had been passed, and the boy could now move. Hyul, very surprised, asked her who she was. The girl introduced herself. Her name was Elena L. Greenwood. She was known as an elder, a great sorceress, and an old friend of Ray. Hyul couldn't believe that there was a dryad standing next to him. The girl said that perhaps now was the time to drive the monster away. Although blinded by desire, the monster did not dare enter her abode, and she appreciated that. In recognition of his patience, and in particular for the destruction of her garden, she forgave him. So the monster had to return to his forest in peace, preserving the remnants of the dignity of a noble creature. Elena gathered the magic ball in her hands, and blowing it out, sent a beam of magic that passed through the entire forest. Hyul realized that the forest itself responded to the girl's words, as if confirming that she was its mistress. Elena continued to address the monster, saying that if he was unable to understand her words, then today he would turn into nothing and be destroyed. Suddenly, the previously smooth beam became sharp and passed around the monster's body, cutting it. Hyul immediately noticed that Drake's body was covered with countless wounds. There was no sound, only the visible aftermath, as if something had riddled Drake with bullets at great speed. Hyul looked at the girl in surprise, not understanding what she had done. The monster could barely stand on its feet, and fresh wounds were visible on its body. Elena said that this was just a warning, and now he had to leave. Finally, the monster obeyed, turned around, and went into his forest. Hyul watched him and saw that his wounds immediately disappeared. It was a terrifying monster of the highest order, and the girl calmly stood up to it, which seemed incredible. Elena turned to the guy and asked if he was okay, to which he replied that he was, thanks to her. The girl noticed that he was probably a little shocked. She invited him to come with her, calling him her successor, and extended her hand. Together, they came to a huge tree, in the trunk of which a door was visible. Elena placed herbal tea in front of the guest, which Ray loved very much. She explained that this tea would make him feel much calmer. Hyul drank it and felt something strange. He didn't understand what this miracle was, but his thoughts cleared up in an instant. Elena happily watched as the guy drank her tea. The girl said that she was very glad that he liked him. She asked if he liked it. Hyul replied that yes, it was the most delicious tea he had ever tasted. The guy admitted that he was a little ashamed for showing his unsightly side. Elena said there was nothing to be ashamed of. The fact that he didn't give in to Drake was impressive enough. Hyul realized that it really was Drake, and he couldn't even move then. Although he is the master of the forest, he usually does not enter Elena's territory, but this time it seemed it was difficult for him to restrain himself. Hyul didn't understand what exactly it was from, and the girl explained that the purely concentrated mana that he carries within himself is a real delicacy for Drake. He probably found the guy incredibly appetizing, and hunger even displaced his fear of Elena. The girl asked if he had any more questions. Hyul asked if all of this was really inside Adrid, since the world here was so real that it lost the feeling of being in a book. The walk from the meeting place with Drake to Lady Elena's house took them at least 15 minutes, and the forest turned out to be enormous, with a scale incomparable to the previous page of tests. The guy couldn't understand where exactly he was and what kind of place it was. Elena explained that this space extends from page 214 to page 232 of the book, being the third page of trials. Hyul couldn't believe it, and asked himself if that Drake was not real, but created with the help of magic. Elena replied that she didn't know, and that he wasn't entirely real, but he wasn't completely fake either. Hyul was surprised at how this should be understood, but the girl said that this space was created based on the memories of the past. They were now inside Adrid, which replicated the Greenwood Forest that once existed in reality. It can be called a copy of the real world, because it is neither completely real nor fake. Hyul realized that the creators took the world of the past and rewrote it. He was placed in Adred's book, but he couldn't understand how that was even possible. Elena said that she didn't know the details, and that the only one who understood this magic was Ray himself, the heir of his teacher. The boy remembered the teacher's words that one day he would reach Ray's level and understand everything. Hyul asked why the teacher created this space then, and Elena answered that it was to transmit a certain magic to him. It was the magic of the third circle of the Whitener style. It was necessary for the acquisition of destruction, representing the eye that could see the nature of magic, the divine eye.